Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto switches his opponents with Shikamaru during the preliminary round before the third stage, part 3. Hope you'll enjoy this video, so before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Chilord, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. Ino? Sakura stared in shock at the sight of her friend angrily stomping up to her. Her face flushed. And her outfit, what are you wearing? Oh, I am so going to get him for this. Ino growled, as she crossed her arms about her chest, glaring down at the snug replica of Naruto's usual outfit, all the way down to the whisker marks on her cheeks. Why were you dressed as Naruto? Sakura couldn't help it, as she stared at her friend, as the blonde girl took her seat next to her. Because he stole all my clothes, and left me with only this to wear. Ino spat out, as her eyes visibly twitched. I mean, I know I pranked him first, but, seriously, do you not remember what Naruto was like in the academy? Kiba spoke up, snickering audibly, as he grinned back at the girl. I mean seriously, Naruto is the prankster king of Konoha. And you pranked him, and didn't think he'd get you back? Akamaru barked from his perch atop Kiba's head, before Inuzuka nodded his head in agreement. Hey, Akamaru wants to know what you did to him anyway. Oh, Ino blushed slightly before ducking her head. I might have put black hair dye in his shampoo, and stolen all his clothes, leaving behind a copy of Sasuke-kun's outfit, as the only thing for him to wear. Kiba stared in shock at the blonde girl, before he stood up, and bowed formally to her, as Akamaru stared in disbelief from atop his head. I bow before your superior pranking skills, Yamanaka-san. Kiba paused a moment, before suddenly grinning fairly up at her. Though I have to wonder at your common sense for painting a Naruto-sized bullseye on yourself. She is obviously attempting to garner Naruto's attention for herself. Shino spoke up simply, as he adjusted his shades atop his head. Yeah, right, Shino. Kiba laughed softly, as he smirked at his teammate. Yamanaka, interested in Naruto? Come on, I wish you were right, Kiba. A new voice spoke up, as Naruto appeared before them with a grumble. Unfortunately, Shino is right. Ino huffed slightly, and glared at Naruto, even, as the tinges of a blush stirred across her cheeks. What? Come on, Ino pig, interested in Naruto. Sakura, laughed at first, before she turned her head, and caught sight of the growing blush on her blonde friend's face. Oh my, he's Naruto's right? And I shall resist her foul machinations to subvert me. Naruto nodded his head, as he thrust his finger dramatically in Ino's direction. Everyone else could only stare, as even Shino's normally impervious stoicism cracked in disbelief at Naruto's declaration, before the blonde boy suddenly began to laugh, as he looked over his shoulder. See? I told you that would be funny. TSK, you're too troublesome, Naruto. Shikamaru couldn't keep the slight grin off his face, as he strolled up behind the blonde, Chuji at his side. Though you do keep Ino out of our hair, so, speaking of where's the bitch? Ino spoke up, as she glanced around. I thought she'd be here. The old pervert had something planned, and wanted her help with it. Naruto shrugged his shoulders helplessly. They're up to something, but all I know is what little the old perv let me in on. Bitch? Old pervert? Sakura stared at Naruto, and Ino in disbelief, as the pair seemed almost siblings in their matching outfits. And when did the two of you get so close? Their identities are classified until after certain events come to pass, Naruto answered seriously. Thus, we can only refer to them by their code names. And Ino was around for most of my training over the last month. You invited Ino pig, but not me? Sakura was staring, hurt at her teammate, as she lightly clenched her fingers into fists. Huh? No. Naruto quickly shook his head, as his hands rose defensively. Asuma got called in to help me train, Ino, Chuji, and Shikamaru saw me training. As a result, we just saw your chakra training. Shikamaru pointed out. Ino's the one that went wherever that A and B lady, and the second stage examiner took you. The bitch wanted a sparring partner. Ino spoke up with a shrug, as she visibly winced. I was dumb enough to volunteer. Nah, we goaded you into it. Naruto countered with a slight smirk on his lips. You were the one she really wanted an excuse to beat up. Ino sniffed loudly before she glared back at Naruto. You do know I am going to get you back for this. Try it. Naruto shot back with a cocky grin on his lips. Just remember the rules, princess. I already told you, I'm a ninja, not a princess. Ino growled softly, as she made it, as if to throttle the boy. Would you rather I call you by your other code name? By Naruto began, as he quickly jumped back just out of Ino's range. No! Ino growled back, as she glared even more intensely at him. Damn you, brat! Does anyone else find this really confusing, and a tad bit creepy? Sakura asked curiously, as she glanced around to the rest of the nearby genin. I do, Shino admitted with a slight shrug of his shoulders. If Shino's saying that, you know it's out there. Kiba agreed with a shuddering nod of his head. Ino blinked a moment, before suddenly pointing towards Kiba and Shino. Oh, that reminds me. Who's the pervert on your guys' team? Shino. Me. The immediate responses caused everyone else, save Ino and Naruto, to twitch and stare in further confusion at the Aburame's confession, as the bug user shrugged his shoulders before glancing at the other genin. Were you not aware that every genin team has a pervert on it? What? Sakura blinked slightly, staring at the boy in shock, as she inched back slightly. Well, I mean, I know Naruto's a pervert. Naruto is not Team 7's pervert. Shino interrupted, as his glasses glinted slightly in the sunlight. Yeah, we already know who the pervert on your team is, Sakura-chan. Ino smirked at her pink-haired friend, as she rolled her eyes. Besides, as the bitch, and I can attest to, Naruto is no pervert. And how do you know that? Sakura stared in absolute disbelief at the boy, then Ino. And who is then? Well, it certainly isn't the Uchiha. Shino deadpanned, as he gave the Emerald Eyes girl a pointed look. Wait, what? Sakura's eyes blazed in fury, as she glared at the Aburame. You're saying I'm the pervert? If the shoe fits, forehead. Ino agrees with a snicker, before flinging her arm around Sakura's shoulder. Don't worry, you're in good company, but seriously, how come you never told me Naruto has such a hot body? Just, as we already established that Ino is Team 10's pervert over a month ago. Naruto agreed in a deadpan similar to Shino's, and hanging out with a crazy lady, and an old pervert at that time really didn't help things. Naruto, did you make into even more troublesome? Shikamaru glared slightly at the boy, as he released a huffing sigh of annoyance. Only for Sasuke, and myself. Naruto countered with a helpless shrug. I'm really starting to pity the bastard these days. Naruto's hot body? What? Sakura's brain seemed to be visibly freezing up, as she tried to work the words through her mind, only to have its gears come grinding to a halt. I think you broke her, princess. A new voice drawled out, as Anko swayed into view, lazily twirling a kunai about on her finger. Maybe there's hope for you yet. Thanks, crazy lady. Ino shot back with a sarcastic little smirk on her lips, as Kiba started, his face paling visibly. You're the examiner from the second stage. The one that cut up Naruto. Ah, thanks for reminding me, Kiba. Naruto nodded, as he almost lazily threw a kunai at Anko, who deflected it with her own. TSK, still too. Anko paused, and blinked before giving Naruto a funny look. Shadow clone? Shadow clone. Naruto agreed with a grin, and a nod of his head. Cheeky brat. Anko smirked softly before rolling her eyes. So you can get me 1 in 10 times now, and I won't stop until it's 1 out of 1. Naruto agreed, before they all saw the telltale puff of smoke rise from behind Anko's jacket, as his clone dispersed. That's a tall order, brat. Think you're up to the challenge? Anko shot back with a savage grin on her face. Who's the one that has trouble keeping up? Naruto shot back with a smirk, as he grinned back at the woman who shot him a sour glare in return. Careful, brat. I do still know where you live. Anko glared slightly at the boy, who only grinned smugly back at her. Yeah, but you like me too much to do anything too mean. After all, who else is so much like you? Naruto grinned at Anko, who couldn't help but smirk slightly, as she reached down and lightly ruffled his head. True enough, brat. Anko chuckled softly, as she shook her head. So, I expect you to put in a good showing. Naruto gave her an incredulously offended look, as he remained silent, and simply stared at her. What? You expected me to pull a Cyclops? Anko shot back, sounding more than slightly offended. No, it's more I'm rather hurt you feel you have to say that. Naruto countered, as he huffed slightly. Of course I'm going to put in a good showing. Who do you think I am? A loudmouth brat? Anko countered with a smirk before she eyed Ino critically. I see you finally got the princess back for Uchiha flying you. It's all about the timing. Naruto agreed with a sage nod of his head. She had to come today, and since she couldn't get anything else, Ino growled sourly, as she lightly glared at Naruto. I will get you for this, you know that, don't you, Naruto-kun? Instantly Naruto went rigid, his eyes widening, as he instantly made warding gestures towards Ino. It's getting worse. Crazy lady, help me. She's adding the kun to my name. Head, you're on your own, kiddo. Anko snickered softly, as she again ruffled his hair. You could always learn to enjoy it. What, you expect me to turn into an old pervert? Naruto was aghast, as he stared back at the woman, before shuddering slightly, this time mirrored by Ino. Don't even think about it, Naruto-kun, Ino stated flatly, as she crossed her arms about her chest, and glared at him. On second thought, if it will drive Ino of Naruto came back, looking speculatively at the identically dressed blonde. It might be a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Ino herself suddenly paused herself, as she lightly rubbed upon her chin, as she looked over at Anko. On second thought myself, that would mean he would be much more open to things, wouldn't it? She's got you there, brat. Anko agreed with a nod of her head before smirking slightly. I think the bitch would like it too. I could always treat Ino like I do her? Naruto offered, as he eyed the other blonde carefully. I'm pretty sure Ino wouldn't react the same way to a spanking. Naruto Kiba spoke up, as he stared at the blonde boy. Seriously, what the fuck? It's been an interesting month. Naruto answered with a mysterious grin on his face. Fun. Painful, traumatizing, dangerous, and unsettling, but definitely fun. He couldn't keep the smile off his face. They worked me harder than I've ever been trained before. Ino paused for a moment, as her eyes glazed over slightly, as a particular image sprung to mind. Did they ever hot, glistening? Naruto shuddered visibly, as he inched over, and started to hide behind Sakura. And like I said, unsettling? Very, very unsettling. Shino grunted softly, as he lightly glared just a bit at Naruto. Why is it the ones who get it, can never appreciate it? Kiba hung his head before sighing, and patting his teammate on the shoulder. Well, if all else fails, Hana does think you're cute. Shino froze in place, before visibly perking up. She does? Please don't tell her I said that though. Kiba quickly continued. If she knows I actually told you. Kiba? Naruto spoke up, studying his friend carefully, as he glanced over at a visibly smirking Anko before going back to his friend again. Hana's your sister, right? Kiba started to nod, before he instantly froze, his head falling limply forward. She's right behind me, isn't she? Why, little brother, how deductive. The overly pleasant tone that came from behind him immediately made Kiba flinch again. You're starting to learn to notice things. As much as I'm sure I'd enjoy the scene of wanton torture of the kid, I don't think the Hokage would be too happy if you eliminated one of the participants prior to his match. Anko spoke up, as she lightly crossed her arms about her chest. Oh, I know. Hana agreed, even as she kept smiling pleasantly at her little brother. I'm just going to limit myself to visualizing it for now. I'll deal with actually taking action on it sometime after the exams are over. Naruto, help me! Kiba looked pleadingly towards his blonde friend, his eyes wide, gleaming with fear. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? Naruto asked, as he glanced at his friend incredulously. I don't know. You're the one that's somehow turning irresistible to women. Kiba countered with a slight growl. It's only Ino. It's not only Ino. Shino cut in, grumbling slightly under his breath, before glancing over at Hana speculatively. Though, everything comes down to a simple question. Do you want to kill him for lying about what you thought? Or because he revealed it? That's a good question, isn't it, Beetle Boy? Hana smirked a bit, her eyes glittering slightly, as she threw the boy a wink. But where would the fun be in just giving you an answer? I see Shino pause for a moment, before suddenly offering a smirk back at her, as he shifted slightly. Then I suppose I'll just have to find out then, won't I? Make it interesting enough, and I might not kill my brother after all. Hana grinned back at the boy, as she roughly pinched her brother's cheek. That sounds like the kind of challenge I could really sink my teeth into. Shino agreed with a nod of his head, and a slightly growing smirk. Hana paused a moment, before shivering slightly, as she eyed the boy with a much more careful eye. Oh, is that a fact? We'll see then, Beetle Boy. I look forward to seeing if I'll bite off more than I can chew. Shino agreed, nodding his head simply. Either way, we'll see who ends up nipped. Kiba was staring now, with growing horror at his friend and teammate, even as his eyes instinctively flicked over to his sister, and he paled even further. Oh hell, I'm so screwed. Go, and play with your other friends, little brother. Hana lightly shoved Kiba away towards the others, as she looped her arm around Shino's shoulder. I'll look after your teammate for you until his match. Oh? Shino paused for a moment, before grinning back at the older teen. And here I was thinking about how much fun it would be to take care of you. Hana's grin put Anko's to shame, as she tightened her grip on the teen, and walked a bit faster away. Oh man, Kiba paused a moment, before groaning out loud, as he banged his head on a nearby rail. Mom is going to kill me, Anko snickered for a moment before shaking her head. Nah, some will get a kick out of it. Naruto took a moment, glancing over towards the retreating Shino and Hana, before sighing, as he shook his head. Oi Kiba, you know about that sound bastard's skills, right? Yeah, he gave me a headache when he pulled it off against Chuji. Kiba nodded his head before shrugging a bit, and smirking, as he pulled back his hair to reveal the plugs in his ears. Fortunately, it's not the first time our clans come up against fuckers that like to use tricks like that. Mom got these for me, and Akamaru. Just watch out, he can do more with that melody arm of his than just that disorientation thing. Naruto warned, as he shook his head. Right, Sakura? Huh? Oh, yeah. Sakura shook herself back into reality, as she quickly nodded her head. He blasted through a huge log with it in the forest of death. Heh, thanks for the tip. Kiba lifted his thumb up in approval. Me, and Akamaru will be sure to wipe the floor with him. Naruto nodded his head a bit before glancing over towards where the sand team were entering the stands. Just watch out for Gaara. That you don't have to tell me. Kiba shuddered visibly, as a haunted look crossed his eyes. We saw what he did to one of the rain teams, even before Lee. If I face him I'm forfeiting. But maybe I'll get lucky, and that bastard Neji will be able to take him out. Neji? Naruto paused for a moment before shrugging a bit. What's he doing? He's a bastard. Kiba growled softly, as he shook his head. Colder than even Sasuke. He treats Hinata like trash, but he's one of the best Juken users Konoha's ever seen. He's the Hyuga prodigy alright. Anko spoke up, nodding her head slightly. He's capable of sealing off people's chakra points along with doing the usual internal damage. She paused a moment, before grinning slightly. Kind of a shame he's up against one of the 3 worst possible opponents for him. Well, I get why Gaara's bad, but who else are you talking about? Kiba asked curiously, as he arched his brow slightly, as the rest of the group looked curious, as well. Had the sand girl for one. She never let him close enough to do any damage, and she could keep beating, and cutting him up from a distance. Anko lifted up her finger before the second one unfurled. The other is Naruto here. Naruto? Kiba looked at the woman incredulously before bursting out laughing. That's funny. I mean no offense Naruto, but anything else Kiba might have said immediately fell silent, as he felt the kunai digging lightly against his spine, before Naruto's voice smiled cheerfully in his ear. What was that, Kiba? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear while I was focusing on making sure I didn't paralyze you from the waist down. Kiba's wide eyes turned incredulously from Naruto smirking smugly in front of him, to the one behind him, as he couldn't help but stare even more. How? I am a combat and assassination specialist, you know. Anko spoke up cheerfully, as she grinned at the Inuzuka boy. And he had to get very, very tricky to keep up with me. The Naruto behind Kiba grinned a moment before suddenly vanishing in a puff of chakra smoke, leaving Kiba without the pressure of the kunai on his body anymore. Geez, Naruto, how the hell did you get this strong? That was just being tricky. Naruto waved it off with a grin. After all, that was just me pranking you. Kiba's eyes glinted a moment, as he studied the boy carefully. You've really grown, haven't you, Naruto? If you say so. Naruto shrugged his shoulders a bit. I mean, come on, we've all grown since the academy, right? Well, except for Shika. Ino chimed in with a smirk. He's still the same lazy bum. All I have to say is that you are damn troublesome, Ino. The boy in question countered. Just be careful against your opponent, Naruto. She's pretty smart apparently. Heh, I'm pretty sure she's going to find herself a little out of her league. Naruto grinned, downright viciously, as he suddenly threaded his fingers behind his neck. You'll see. Oh, big words from the runt. Temari spoke up, as they came within hearing range at Naruto's boast, a sneer on her face. If you think that little shadow clone trick of yours is going to work on me, really? A voice piped up from behind her, because another said from just below her. That's came another from the other side. Not how it looks to us, finished a cheerful chorus of voices, as Temari suddenly twitched, as she found herself surrounded by grinning copies of the blonde brat, who waved cheekily at her before suddenly vanishing in a flash of chakra smoke. Why you little, Temari growled softly, her eyes flashing, as she gripped onto her fan, ready to unsling it from her back. Anko spoke up cheerfully, as she reminded the blonde girl of her presence. Hostile action outside of the matches will get you disqualified. You wouldn't want to start ruining the good relations between our villages, would you? Temari actually flinched, as the woman's words hit a bit closer to home than they really should before she reluctantly loosened her grip on her fan. And what would you call what he did then, huh? Did he threaten you? Did he take any violent action? Anko countered, as Temari blushed slightly, but shook her head. Then, it looks to me, he was being smart, and getting in your head to throw you off your game before the match even started. Hey, no fair running things, crazy lady. Naruto whined softly, as he pouted at Anko. Get used to it, brat. Anko smirked back at the boy. If you're going to be you better get used to plans falling apart on occasion. Fine. Temari growled softly before glaring over at Naruto. I'll deal with you, and your clone soon enough. And with that, the blonde girl turned, and stalked back to her teammates, casting one last scathing glare at the boy before they disappeared into the crowd. Naruto paused for a moment, before glancing around, making certain that the Suna team was well, and truly gone, before he suddenly exploded into laughter. It actually worked. Of course it did, brat. Anko rolled her eyes, and lightly tapped him atop his head with the ring end of her kunai. Naruto, why did you just give away your new skills so easily? Sakura growled at Naruto, as she glared at the boy. Now she's going to know what to expect. Nah, now she thinks she knows what to expect. Naruto grinned eagerly back at his teammate, as he rubbed his hands together. Which means I get to mess with her even more when she finds out I'm not going to be using clones to beat her. Trust me, forehead. Ino cut in before Sakura could respond. You haven't seen what Naruto-kun's really capable of. Naruto Kiba spoke up, staring at the boy. When did you get so devious? What? All I did was prank her. Naruto grinned back innocently at Kiba. Crazy lady here. And the old pervert let me know that a lot of you used to prank people. You also used to mess with opponents, so I prank him. You mean, like that time with Zabuza? Sakura asked curiously, as she arched up a brow, and studied the boy carefully. Yeah, that was pretty awesome, wasn't it? Naruto paused for a moment, as he grinned broadly at Sakura. Zabuza? Anko blinked a moment, as she arched a brow at Naruto. That missing nin your team encountered in Wave? Well, he had Kakashi-sensei in this water prison technique, and he was sending water clones at us to deal with us. Naruto paused for a moment, before chuckling just a bit. So I came up with this awesome plan. I transformed into a windmill shuriken, then had a clone toss it, and a real windmill shuriken to Sasuke. He threw them both, me in the shadow, then when Zabuza just barely dodged me, I transformed back, and threw a kunai at him. He dodged, but he had to let Kakashi-sensei go. Just keep remembering to do stuff like that. Anko nodded her head, and lightly ruffled his hair. It'll keep you, and your teammates alive. Too many people expect the conventional approach. Especially from brats like you. Don't worry. Naruto waved his hand dismissively. I'm more worried about Ino trying to steal my jacket and shirt right now than anything. The boy gestured towards where the blonde girl froze, her fingers inches away from his jacket. Seriously, you didn't actually think I spent all that time with crazy lady trying to fill me full of bloody holes without developing some sense of when people are trying to sneak up on me, did you? Well, I could always. Ino started, as she held up her hands meaningfully, almost forming a sign. And if I didn't know you hadn't been specifically told not to do that to me under any and all circumstances by your father, I might actually be worried. Naruto agreed with a nod of his head before his face grew serious. But there is a very, very good reason for that, Ino. Never try to get into me. Naruto paused for a moment, before glancing around. Listen to him, princess. Anko spoke up seriously. There's a good chance that you won't get out again. And even if you do, well, there's no guarantee how much you would make. For that matter, never tried to get into Gaara either. Naruto flashed a look at Anko, warning in his eyes, as he crossed his arms about his chest. Easy kid, you don't want your little girlfriend here to get caught up in a bad way, do you? Anko smirked back teasingly, as she threw him a wink, while Ino blushed brightly. Not my girlfriend. Naruto shot back with a growl, as he shook his head. Not going to happen. Besides, she'll get over it soon enough, and be back to chasing Sasuke full-time anyway. Anko caught the slight bitter tinge in Naruto's words before sighing slightly, as she lightly patted his shoulder, while the rest of the kids looked on cluelessly. There were times when she wondered how much of the kid's cluelessness was self-imposed, just so he didn't have to face the truth of the world around him. She wasn't sure how else she could really explain the speed at which he seemed to learn things otherwise. Don't worry about it, brat. What happens, happens. Yeah. Naruto nodded his head, crossing his arms, as he looked down at the arena. Doesn't mean I can't change it if I don't want to, though. Well now, if you really do want, she began, her eyes twinkling, as she glanced again towards Ino. I don't. Naruto responded quickly, even as his face blushed brightly, and he looked away with a shake of his head. Whatever you say, kid, whatever you say, Anko said with a smirk on her lips, and a twinkle in her eyes. As Naruto made his way down with the rest of the finalists, minus a still absent Sasuke, Sakura stared nervously from her teammate to the vicious girl he was going to face. Catching the look on her friend's face, Ino rolled her eyes a bit, and elbowed at Sakura's side. Relax, Naruto-kun will be fine, but that girl is almost scarily strong. Sakura shot back, as her eyes stayed riveted on her teammate. Look at how easily she beat Tenten. She bit her thumb lightly, as she slowly shook her head. Against someone like that, what can Naruto do? Forehead, trust me, Naruto-kun is a lot stronger than you think he is. Ino rolled her eyes slightly, as she leaned back, and stretched out a bit. He won't even break a sweat for this match. You think Naruto-kun will be okay? Hinata Hyuga spoke up bashfully, as she glanced over at Ino from where she sat next to her teammates. Ino's eyes narrowed at the girl who stuttered out her question, or more precisely what the blush on her cheeks, and the suffix on the end of Naruto's name implied. Okay, I've got a good idea of what he's capable of. He's got some tricks already that will knock her on her ass in shock. Believe it! Sakura stared at Ino with a small look of fear rising across her face. Ino pig, you seriously spent way too much time hanging out with Naruto this last month. Just watch, everyone. Ino shook her head, as she focused her eyes solely on Naruto. He's going to show everyone how awesome he really is. Naruto arched a brow slightly at the chewing proctor, as he lightly tapped his foot. So, are we going to be getting this started anytime soon? Heh, in a rush to get beaten, runt? Temari shot back, as she casually unslung her fan, and struck it firmly against the ground. I'll see if I leave enough of you left for you to actually do some growing, but no promises. Right, I'm so scared of a girl who couldn't even notice she was surrounded with armed shadow clones until they started talking. Naruto rolled his eyes and snorted. I mean, seriously, come on. I had like a dozen of them, and you were too busy running your mouth to notice. Genma blinked slightly, as he eyed the boy just a bit before shaking his head slightly in amusement. A little cocky there, don't you think, kid? Naruto snorted slightly, and rolled his eyes. Please, do you know what will happen to me if I lose this match? You'll be given to Team 9 for training? Genma offered with a bemused smirk. Super bushy brows. Naruto paused for a moment in consideration before shaking his head. Nah, crazy lady's worse. Crazy lady? Genma's lips twitched a bit, as he glanced upwards to the arena in consideration. Anko Mitarashi, Naruto supplied simply with a shrug. If I lose, she'll be most displeased with me. Genma immediately paled in understanding, as he nodded his head, before offering up a short prayer for the boy's safety. Then may the gods smile on you. That name sounds familiar. Temari paused for a moment, her brow furrowing in concentration. The second stage examiner, Genma answered with a smirk on his lips, as he shifted the thin length on his mouth. And one of the scariest kunoichi to have ever been a member of the Hidden Leaf. Heh, she's the one that threw the kunai at me. Naruto offered with a smirk, as he shook his head. Well, I shouldn't just say it like it was one. She's thrown a lot of them at me. Yeah, well, guess what, runt? Temari smirked, as she flicked her fan open, and settled back into position. There's a lot of difference between dodging kunai, and dodging the wind. Looks like she's ready to go. Genma noted with a smirk. How about you, kid? Again, I feel the urge to point out that she was the one who isn't aware of her surroundings enough to know when she's surrounded by shadow clones. Naruto pointed out with a slight smirk on his lips, as he kept his eyes firmly glued on Temari. Instantly Temari began to whirl around, her fan raised, ready to strike, only to find absolutely nothing? What the? Crazy lady was right. Naruto noted with a nod of his head. It is fun to fuck with their heads. You're going to be even more trouble than you were before. Genma noted before stepping back. Alright. The first match of the Chunin exams will begin now. Temari growled angrily, as she suddenly leapt backwards, putting even more distance between the two of them. As Naruto simply stood there, crossing his arms with a bored expression on his face. Come on already, he said, start. So let's see what you've got. I'm getting bored here. Oh, cocky little bastard, are you? Temari's eyes narrowed darkly, as she let a growl rumble up past her lips. Fine. Hope you'll enjoy needing a closed casket for your funeral. And with that, Temari shifted body, and with a swipe of her fan, a blast of wind and dust rose up and shot straight at Naruto. There was an almost bored expression on the boy's face, as he watched the attack headed for him, before he vanished in the blast, and the obscuring dust that trailed after it. Temari smirked softly, as she shook her head, sneering again towards where the boy had stood. Seriously, what kind of idiot are you? Just waiting there for my attack? Even if you're able to anchor yourself, it will still do plenty of damage. Was that it? As the dust began to settle, Naruto was revealed again, his pinky stuck in his ear, as he lightly wiggled it about, without a sign of any kind of damage on his entire body. Huh, I was kinda expecting more from all that talk. Impossible! Temari's eyes were wide, as she stared in absolute disbelief at the boy who didn't even seem touched by her attack. There's no way you could have dodged that. Well, actually I could have. Naruto paused for a moment, lightly cupping his chin in consideration before shrugging a bit. But honestly, it would have been too troublesome. Shikamaru blinked, then stared in absolute shock down at Naruto before he turned his head to the completely gaping Ino. Did Naruto just steal my line? That jerk. How dare he pretend to be a lazy bum? Ino practically screeched, as her eyes burned angrily. When I get my hands on him. Meh, relax, princess. Anko snickered softly, as she held a restraining hand on one's shoulder. He's just messing with her head, and doing a pretty good job of it, it seems. Ino followed the woman's gaze, as she caught sight of where Temari was beginning to grow visibly irate on the arena field. Well, maybe it doesn't mean I'm not going to have words with him. Anko rolled her eyes before settling back to continue watching the show. So, substitution? Temari put forth, narrowing her eyes at the boy, who blinked back at her, his arms still lazily crossed about his chest. That trick won't help you, eh? What did I substitute? Naruto blinked again, as he lightly reached up, scratching at the side of his head. Wait, you're talking about the technique? He canted his head slightly to the side, before rubbing at his neck slightly, and shaking his head. Nah, that would have been too much trouble. The boy yawned slightly before walking over to a tree, and leaning against it. Let me know when you're going to use a real attack on me. Temari's eye developed a twitch, as Genma was openly staring at Naruto now. The blonde's eyes settled into a bored glance in Temari's direction, before falling shut with a yawn. Whenever you're ready, sunshine. You are so dead it's not even funny. Temari grit out, as she growls, before summoning up her chakra, and suddenly letting loose a massive cutting whirlwind at the boy. And again, dust and debris kicked up, and again, Naruto was masked from view. Seconds passed, and again, there wasn't any movement seen in the slowly settling dust. Then, as before, Naruto was revealed, still completely and utterly relaxed, as he yawned again, then cracked an eye open. Did you do something, sunshine? Temari gaped in disbelief, and borderline rage, as she could feel her hands twitching around her fan, before bringing her hand up, focusing again on her chakra before making a single sign. Release. Nope, sorry, sunshine. I've got no talent whatsoever. Naruto offered amiably, as he shook his head, and yawned a bit more. Are you ever going to actually try something? Genma shook his head, and couldn't help but fight viciously to bite back the laugh that threatened to escape his lips. Suddenly, things were becoming much clearer. Whatever the kid had been doing the last month, it had involved Anko, and she'd been sure to make certain the kid understood at least a little bit about psychological warfare. I don't know what you're doing, or how, but I am going to rip you into bloody little pieces. Temari hissed again, as she pulled back, her green eyes narrowed into slits, before she began to send blast after blast at the boy, and everything in his general vicinity, sending blast after blast his way. Then, suddenly she could see a figure, walking forward, walking through her blasts. As she sent another, and another, her eyes only grew in shock, as Naruto's form could be seen, lazily strolling towards her. His hair, his clothes only rippled with his steps, his fingers stuck down in his pockets, as he wore an expression of complete boredom. Finally, he came to a stop, just a few feet in front of her, and arched a brow curiously at the now panting girl. Well, sunshine? Are you going to do something, or are you just going to stand there, looking pretty? Again, Naruto's pinky lifted up, and he stuck it into his ear, wiggling it about. Because if not, you might, as well just forfeit. Because seriously, this is kind of embarrassing. Anger again flashed in those eyes, as suddenly her fan snapped shut, and she lunged forward, arching the heavy iron length directly for his head. She could feel a sudden surge of satisfaction rush through her, as she saw him actually reacting. Satisfaction that sank into even further disbelief, as the boy dodged towards the side, then slashed downwards towards her weapon. Suddenly it felt lighter, too light in her hand, as she pulled it back, only to stare in horrified shock, as she had only a third of the length left cut cleanly through. As the boy smirked back at her, and hunched down, picking up the ruined, but much larger piece of her weapon. Huh, I think you dropped this, sunshine. Screaming inarticulately, Temari rushed forward, with the almost useless stump of her weapon, knowing only one single desire. She was going to crush his thick, annoying, and lazy skull in. She was going to brutalize him, crush him, pulverize him. She was. The sudden, sharp impact of her own weapon on the side of her skull brought her up short, as she stared incredulously at the almost apologetic grin on the boy's face, before oblivion reached up and dragged her down into its embrace. Standing over the unconscious girl, Naruto blinked a moment before scratching the back of his head. So, does that mean I win? Yeah, kid, you win. Genma agreed before looking back at the crowd. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto grinned sheepishly, as he scratched the back of his head. Well, I'll just get her to the medical wing. He bowed his head slightly before a group of clones popped into existence, picking up the girl, and her destroyed weapon, before grinning again, as he led them towards the arena exit. Kid? Genma paused for a moment, his lips twitching a bit in amusement. The medical wing is that way. Is it? Naruto blinked a moment, before his sheepish grin only grew. Laughing nervously, the boy nodded his head, before heading in the direction the proctor had gestured. Thanks, no problem. Genma rolled his own eyes a bit, as he shook his head, and then called out. Alright. Next contestants. Shino Aburame, and Kankuro. You're up. Kankuro growled slightly, as he glared down at where he saw his sister being carried out of the arena, even as he gripped tightly on his bundle. For a moment he said nothing, caught up in indecision before he groaned out, and raised his hand. I forfeit. Shino blinked slightly from where he'd been about to get up from his seat next to Hana, before turning his head, and glancing at the person next to him, and frowning slightly. Well, that's slightly frustrating. I was looking forward to actually doing something to show that I'm ready to be a. He paused a moment in consideration before actually grinning slightly. Ah well, there's always next time. What, you're going to forfeit too? Hana arched her brow, as she casually studied the boy, even as she grabbed the back of his jacket, and tugged him back to the seat next to her. Never. Shino disagreed with a slight shake of his head. But do you realize what Naruto just did? Actually, no, I don't. Hana admitted with a wince, as she glanced over towards where the boy was exiting the arena. Whatever it was, it certainly looked impressive, and he used it very, very well. So well, in fact, that most people were focusing on his attitude instead of how he was doing it. Shino agreed with a nod of his head. However, I do have a theory, especially based on the way he destroyed her weapon. An idea that leaves me with little doubt that Naruto will indeed one day achieve his goal. So, what's the theory then? Hana paused for a moment, before her brows knitted in confusion. I mean, it wasn't a was it? No, it was pure elemental manipulation, Shino responded with a slight grin on his lips. The fan was destroyed, as if it had been cut cleanly through. He paused for a moment, letting her digest that tidbit of information before continuing. I theorize he did the same thing to her attacks. He cut through them. What does that mean? Hana blushed slightly, as she reached back, nervously scratching her neck. I'm a vet, never had much interest in elemental manipulation. He beat her with her own element, Shino answered simply, as he adjusted his glasses. He used his wind to cut hers, and to have done it, looking so effortlessly? Naruto has obviously grown quickly. Don't worry. Hana leaned in, and suddenly tugged on the lobe of his ear with her teeth. If you really feel the need to show off, I'll give you my own exam. Shino shivered, and almost melted back against her before giving her a serious look. One I'm sure I will find far more interesting than the current one. You better. Hana agreed with a smirk. Alright, since Kankuro has forfeited, Genma rolled his eyes just a bit before sighing, as he glanced around. Next match will be Dosu Kinyuta against Kiba Inuzuka. Will the competitors please come down? Unless, of course, one of you two wants to forfeit, as well? Come on, buddy, let's go! Kiba lightly tucked his partner into his jacket, before jumping forward, launching himself easily down to the arena floor, where he landed in a ready crouch. Dosu, however, chose a more sedate path, walking calmly down the wall until he was standing directly across from Kiba, his one visible eye glaring at the smirking boy. Are both competitors ready? Genma called out, as he glanced between the Sound Nin and the Inuzuka. You're friends with that Naruto bastard, huh? Dosu spoke up, his eyes narrowed dangerously, as he lightly clenched his fingers together. Be sure to tell him that I'm going to pay him back for whatever it was he did to Kin after I send you back up there in a bloody heap. Kiba looked at the boy in front of him for a moment, before suddenly bursting out laughing, as he let his finger raise up, and pointed at the boy. You think that? Eesh, man, you guys are idiots. I mean, come on. Naruto just trounced that sand girl without even breaking a sweat, and you think you've got a shot against him? Heh. Dosu narrowed his eye into a slit, as he readied his arm. Never mind, I'll tell the little bastard myself after I kill you. You know, I'm really getting sick of people underestimating me, and Akamaru, Kiba noted, as all traces of humor suddenly melted off his face, the smile on his lips turning suddenly into feral anticipation. I'm gonna enjoy rubbing your face in it. Right, at least that Naruto kid did his pre-match mind games prior to actually getting down here. Genma rolled his eyes just a bit before twisting the needle in his mouth. Alright, so you two got your little kitty trash talk out of the way so we can get this started? Dosu scoffed loudly, and glared at the man while Kiba let loose a quiet growl. Shaking his head, and fighting off the urge to laugh at them, Genma nodded his head. Right then, the match began. Immediately the Sound Nin rushed forward, his melody arm striking out, as he threw a punch towards Kiba, who immediately launched into a piercing fang attack, throwing Dosu backwards towards the arena wall before sliding into position, fingers curled back like claws, as he crouched firmly without even the slightest bit of sway. Dosu rolled his way back onto his feet, as his single eye narrowed dangerously towards the boy. How? What, you think you're the first ninja to use sound as a weapon? Kiba snorted back at the visibly slashed up Dosu. Especially against those of us that use enhanced senses? That trick won't work on us. Immediately the Inuzuka launched another of his piercing fang attacks. Dosu narrowed his eyes once more, as he suddenly struck down into the earth, as the ground suddenly exploded into a wave of shrapnel that knocked his opponent out of his attack. If you think that's the extent of my melody arm, you're sadly mistaken. Damn it. Kiba growled slowly under his breath, before immediately he switched tactics, launching careful sets of kunai and shuriken to probe his foe's defense. Heh, is that the best you've got? Dosu sneered back at the boy, as he alternated between dodging and deflecting the projectiles with the weapon attached to his arm. Trying to get in a lucky shot? How pathetic. Nothing pathetic about testing an asshole's defenses. Kiba shot back, his eyes narrowed into slits, as he gave another, lower growl. What, getting angry already? Ha! The sneer on the bandaged boy's face grew triumphant. I knew you Leaf Genin were pathetic. You know, maybe you should have paid less attention to what I was doing, and more to what my partner was. Kiba grinned ferally, as he suddenly shouted out, Now, Akamaru. Alarmed Dosu immediately lifted his arm, and swirled around, his eye locking onto the small dog launching himself through the air, quickly estimating where the leap would take it, as his gaze focused on the beast's mouth and jaws. Ha! You expect me to arggggg? So focused was the boy on the more obvious threats, that he missed the sudden stream of yellow liquid that burst forth from his belly, and blasted into Dog's eye. Kiba immediately sprung forward, growling again, as he latched onto the melody arm, even as he kicked hard into Dog's side, trying to rip the weapon off of the boy's arm. When that failed, Kiba swore before he slammed the kunai down into the opponent's elbow, and sprang away. His eyes narrowed into slits, as he watched Dosu let loose another scream of pain, before the boy's voice filled the air. I'll kill you! Immediately rushing towards the sound of Kiba's landing, Dosu ran head-on into a third piercing fang. The attack hit the raging Nin head-on, before blasting him backwards hard into the arena wall where he slumped down, unconscious. Grinning, Kiba threw up his thumb towards the stands before turning to the proctor. So, gonna call it? Heh, fine. Winner, Kiba Inuzuka. Genma chuckled just a bit, and shook his head. Next up, Neji Hyuga vs. Gaara of the Desert. There was a palpable silence that fell over the crowd, as the two stoic figures made their way down into the arena. While Neji performed a graceful, silent leap down onto the floor, Gaara simply turned, and strode the longer route through the hallways. It was several minutes later when he appeared, a slight twitch of a grin on his lips, even, as he kept his arms crossed about his chest. If Neji had been bothered by the weight, the Hyuga let none of it show across his cold features, as he lightly slid into a ready stance. I see that we will soon know what fate has decided for us on this day. Fate? Gaara paused, as if tasting over the word, as he lightly tilted his head to the side. Interesting. Does this fate prove your existence, It is what binds us all, and cages us, Neji countered, as he stood ready. Just as I am condemned to a life, as a slave, while a weaker member of my clan walks in the sunlight. Gaara seemed to consider this, his blank jade eyes blinking slightly for a moment, before simply nodding his head. So you're strong then? I am the strongest of Konoha's genin. Neji responded simply, as he stood there, straight and proud. Good. A slow, dark grin began to bubble up across Gaara's face, as he canted his head back. Mother is upset with me for feeding her the weak, nasty blood earlier. Come, let's see your strength come, and wash the taste clean with your strong blood. As I seem to need to reiterate this, Genma spoke up, glancing between the two. If I declare a match over, it is over. Understood? Neji simply nodded his head in acceptance while Gaara nodded his head almost imperceptibly, causing Genma to sigh. Fine. Match, begin. In a flash, Neji blurred forward, flashing through speeds reminiscent of teammate, as he flashed forward, his palms flashing through the sand before it could fully form to land a strike against Gaara's shoulder, before he blasted back, and away just as Gaara let out a sudden scream of pain. Standing coldly before the other boy, Neji held up his hands, as he spoke coldly. You will find that I am a far greater threat than my teammate. Your sand armor may prevent me from seeing your chakra system, but it still can't protect you from chakra that strikes through it. Pain. Gaara paused for a moment, staring in disbelief at the wide-eyed boy, before slowly leaning back, and laughing, as he suddenly sent waves of sand blasting towards Neji. Good. Show me your strength. Prove my existence. Neji flowed around the strikes, his body twisting, flowing around the streaming lashes of sand, as he began to strike, again and again upon Gaara's body, laying only a single blow at a time often, as he'd immediately have to jump back to avoid the ever-quickening sand. In only a few moments, Neji was panting from exertion, as he watched Gaara laughing even more, as suddenly his sand began to form into various shapes, his sand armor manipulating his body into action. Another flash forward, only this time, Neji was so focused on his target, he'd missed the thin bar of sand that had formed just at the height of his ankle. In an instant, he was falling, crashing to the earth, as the sand coiled about his ankle like a snake. Neji's hand slashed down, blasting away the sand with a burst of chakra, but it had done its job. Those precious moments he'd taken to free himself had been all the sand had needed. In an instant, Gaara had sent it wrapping about Neji's leg, and with a sudden, audible crack, the leg was snapped under the pressure, as more and more sand began to stream around Neji's body. Biting back a scream, Neji shifted, struggling, as he tried, desperately to release a surge of chakra from every point of his chakra system at once. Trying desperately to make some use of the Kaiten technique he's forgotten attempting to master in favor of the speed to actually strike the monster he would be facing. For a moment, he succeeded, blasting the sand off him, and revealing the bloody white bone jutting out of his leg, as he tried to jump back, and away with his still good foot. No more running now. Gaara was almost laughing again, as he brought his hand up, a sudden hand forming out of the sand, before blasting into Neji. It picked up him, carrying him with it until it slammed back into the wall. Then, the boy bit back a strangled scream, as he felt it begin to squeeze slowly. Now feed mother with your delicious strength. That's enough. Winner Gaara. Genma spoke up, as he appeared between the two. Let him go. Mother wants to thank you for helping prove my existence. Gaara spoke up, seemingly ignoring the examiner, as he focused on packing more, and more sand around his victim. Gaara, this is your last warning. Genma's voice suddenly went cold, as his eyes grew flinty and hard. If you do not release him, you will be disqualified, and I will end your existence here, and now. Gaara turned his attention onto the proctor, his eyes burning with bloodlust, as he let off a slow dark growl. What did you say? His eyes narrowed into slits. Genma immediately flashed through a series of hand signs before slamming his fist down on the ground, causing a suddenly corresponding fist of stone to explode upwards out of the ground beneath Gaara, impacting solidly onto the red-headed boy's chin, snapping his head back in a daze, as his concentration faltered. If I have to, I will call down a number of others, and we will send you here, and now either let go of him, and wait for your next match, or die. What will it be? Gaara paused for a moment, visibly dazed that the man had actually been able to strike him. Why do you defend him then? He's not your student. Because my job is to keep back on needless fatalities. You already won. Now I told you the choices you have, which will it be? Fine. Gaara snarled, pulling back his sand, as he stalked across the arena, flooding it with pure, unadulterated bloodlust, as he took a moment, moving back and forth, almost like a caged animal, as he began to slowly calm down. Sighing softly, Genma signaled the medics to remove the kid from the arena. We'll take a short break, before the next match between Gaara and Sasuke Uchiha will begin. It was some minutes later that the swirling storm of leaves appeared with Kakashi and Sasuke, before the final battle of the exams began, just before everything descended into the chaos of invasion. Only the sand and sound troops found that the leaf was far from being caught unaware by their attack. As Kankuro began to escape with his debilitated brother, a freshly awakened Naruto was given his orders by Kakashi to stop Gaara from unleashing devastation on the leaf. Damn it, Sasuke! Naruto growled, as he watched his teammate collapse, struggling against the spreading influence of his curse seal. Weren't you told to not use that thing? Excuse me, for being out of options, you idiot. Sasuke hissed back through gritted teeth, as she glared at her rather oblivious teammate. Yeah? Naruto shook his head before he turned his attention onto the half-transformed Gaara. Ugh man, you got ugly. Sakura, get Sasuke to safety. I'll cover you. What the hell do you think you're doing, Naruto? Sakura demanded even, as she appeared on the tree next to Sasuke. I mean, I know you're stronger than before. This isn't a debate, Sakura. Get out of here. There's nothing you can do in a fight like this, and Sasuke is already at his limit. Naruto snapped back, even, as he jumped out of the way, as a madly laughing Gaara struck at the tree he'd been on moments before. Go! Now! Gritting her teeth, Sakura gave the blonde one last look, before nodding her head, and pulling Sasuke over her shoulder. Naruto, stay alive. Don't you dare die on me. You got that, idiot! Sasuke growled, as well, as she allowed Sakura to support her even, as they started to jump back towards Konoha. I won't. And that's a promise, believe it! Naruto shot them a grin before he turned, and faced another of Gaara's swinging strikes. Only, the instant it came too close to Naruto, it suddenly cut apart, as the maddened Sannin let off a scream of pain. What? Gaara snarled, as it finally registered that Sasuke, his prey, his proof of existence, was escaping. No! You won't deny me! I will give Mother his blood. Ugh, great! Naruto danced quickly backwards, as he narrowed his eyes, and suddenly rushed towards his opponent, even, as the boy continued to transform. A massive tail of sand appeared behind him. Huh, that's new. What are they to you? Gaara snarled softly, as he shifted more and more, his second arm transforming, as the sand grew out to exude from the entirety of his torso, slowly, quickly transforming even his entire face. They're my friends, Naruto said simply, as he would shift and stand, studying the rapidly transforming creature in front of him. They're my strength, my reason for fighting, And my reason for my dream? Fool! I fight only for myself. Gaara snarled even more, his eyes burning gold, as they stared back at him with pure contempt. Only loving yourself is the only way to have true power. Suddenly, as he stared into Gaara's eyes, a slow realization bubbled up through Naruto, as he saw a look in those eyes he'd seen a long time before. You didn't have anyone, did you? No one to care about you, no one to be your friend. Fool, what use does a monster like me have for friends? A snarl curled across Gaara's face, as suddenly he unleashed a barrage of sand shurikens at the boy, only to feel the anger spike, as none of them seemed to touch him, leaving him standing where he was. They're what makes someone truly strong, Naruto countered, as he slowly shook his head. They're the ones that pick you up from the darkness. They're the ones that give you a reason to keep pushing yourself, to keep growing, to never stop, never give up. He paused a moment, considering, before he gave Gaara an almost pitying look. If I didn't have them, I probably would have ended up like you. Like me? Don't make me laugh, Gaara snarled, as he let loose another barrage of the shurikens, only to find them meeting the same fate, sending another bubbling spike of anger coursing through the boy. You have no idea what it's like to be like me. For a moment, Naruto said nothing, merely staring back at Gaara with a look of pity that made the boy suddenly boil with even more rage, before closing his eyes for a moment, before a wave of bloodlust and violence burst into the air, as a cloak of bloody red chakra bubbled forth around him. Nails grew into claws, as the thin marks on Naruto's cheeks grew, turning into thick jagged collections of lines, as the tip of a fang fell over his lower lip. Then, his eyes opened once more, and Gaara could feel the sudden pulse of actual fear echoing through the creature that inhabited him. What are you? Gaara took a step back, some of his sand almost seeming to shrink back from the simple presence of the chakra pouring off the boy. I told you. I'm like you. I'm what you could have been, with friends, and people caring about you. Naruto looked into the sand creature's eyes. Eh? And then, the chakra was cast aside, pushed back down into the confines of its seal, as Naruto shook his head, and looked at the almost awed Gaara. But I told you, I'd show you the strength that comes from my friends, right? Fool, giving up that kind of power? Gaara snarled, his eyes burning with fury, as he suddenly launched himself at the boy, mouths forming all over his body, sucking in massive breaths of air, until he was suddenly point blank at the boy who kept his hands curled into claws at his sides, before suddenly unleashing a massive blast of sand, and wind point blank at the unyielding boy. A moment later, two fingers could be seen standing motionless on the massive tree branch, before suddenly both of Gaara's sand arms fell down, severed from his body, with a massive gash running down the entire length of his body, with Naruto's head slammed forward into Gaara's own. As their eyes bore into one another, Naruto grinned back at the demonic visage. I told you I only need the power I get from the desire to protect my friends. Immediately he kicked at the creature's torso, sending Gaara toppling towards the ground. Immediately the arms melted into sand, before they followed after the sand neem. An instant later, Gaara stared up at Naruto in sheer disbelief, even as he healed the damage up once more. The longer this continued, the more damage he had to heal, the weaker he could feel himself growing. Every time, it was a little bit harder to repair the damage. No, he couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't allow his existence to be snuffed out. With a sudden roar, power surged through sand creatures, and in a flash, suddenly, a fully covered tanuki of sand loomed over the forest with a massive roar of power. Oh joy! Wonderful! Naruto shook his head, and glared up at the creature even, as he could see the streams of sand headed towards him. Fine, you want to play it that way? We'll play it that way. Naruto bit into his thumb, before his fingers flashed through the appropriate hand signs, and he could feel the chakra welling up inside of him, before a flash of power erupted, and suddenly he again stood atop Gamabunta. What? You again? The massive toad let his eyes flick from the demonic tanuki up to the boy sitting atop his head. Hey again, boss. How's it going? Naruto scratched the back of his head nervously before glancing at Gaara. Look, I know we haven't gone drinking yet. Damn straight, the gigantic toad agreed, as it shifted its pipe about in its mouth. And I refuse to work with an underling who hasn't. So what the hell do you think you're doing? Because I need your help. Naruto shot back with a growl. Konoha's being invaded, and this guy is one of them. If I don't stop him here, he'll go back and start attacking my friends. I can't let that happen. What do I care about in your little village? The toad boss countered sourly even, as he could feel the twisting in his gut the words evoked. They say that the fourth rode atop a massive toad on his final battle, Naruto answered simply, as he glared at the sand tanuki in front of them. Who fought with him against the Nine Tails long enough to allow him to seal it in me? That was you, wasn't it? You were there when he gave his life for Konoha. Gamabunta remained silent, as he gripped more tightly on his pipe, taking a deep, steadying breath, before waiting for the boy to continue. So I'm asking you to fight for what he would have wanted. To protect the people that meant everything to him. Naruto spoke up solemnly, as he glared at the creature in front of them. This once, please, boss, lend me your strength so I can make him proud. Again, the boss of the toads took a deep inhale on his pipe, before a slight smile curled on those lips. He already is, kid. That much I'm certain of. Come on, I'll show you the ways of our family. We'll show this bum what it means to mess with us. With a wild grin on his lips, Naruto let out a cheer of triumph, as the two leaped into battle. Wah! Temari slowly opened her eyes, groggily to find herself facing the sitting form of a masked girl, dressed in a variety of grays with a collar with a leaf insignia engraved on it wrapped about her throat, calmly cleaning her nails with a, "Oh, you're finally awake then?" Kin noted with a casually bored tone, as she lightly studied the blonde girl in front of her. "I was wondering how long you were going to be out, sleeping beauty." "What the hell?" Temari frowned a moment before she suddenly recognized the tension in her limbs, as she attempted to move, and found herself bound down to the bed. "Why the fuck am I tied up? You are a member of an invading force, remember?" That same casually bored tone was given, as the girl slightly arched her brow just a bit. "Did you expect to wake up in the luxury suite?" Temari instantly froze, her face paling dramatically, as sudden realization hit her. They knew. The invasion had begun. Or worse, it was already over by now. "What happened?" Kin tilted her head slightly to the side. "After you lost your match, you were taken here. We had you tied up already. But that was mainly because Konoha's known about the invasion for a month now." At the gaping look on the girl's face, Kin shrugged slightly. "Long story short, the invasion is over now. Both Kages are apparently dead. You have no idea how much I want to hurt you for the part your village played in helping the Hokage meet his end." Fire suddenly danced in those eyes as Kin flicked her wrist, then suddenly flashing out, buried next to Temari's head. The old man, he deserved better than that. She paused for a moment, taking a slow, steadying breath. Even if he was right, he beat Orochimaru. Send the bastard running. Then Gaara. Temari's eyes only grew even further, as she stared fearfully at the girl in front of her. "Lost," Kin responded with a vicious grin beneath her mask. "Got beat by the same guy that beat you." The way I hear it, Gaara even let that monster inside of him out completely. It wasn't enough. Gaara lost. It simply didn't compute. Gaara simply didn't lose. That's not possible. And yet, the giant sand tanuki was beaten by the kid riding the giant toad. Kin answered back, as she lightly pulled out another, and began to twirl it around her fingers. "Thus that brings us to you, O daughter of the fourth Kazekage." Temari forced down the sense of dread that rose up from her stomach, feeling it clenching tightly, as she watched the calm manner the girl in front of her addressed her. "What about me?" "Well, before he died, the old man had already decided your fate." Kin paused a moment, letting Temari consider those words, as she lightly continued to twirl around her little fingers. "You're just going to let me wonder about it, aren't you?" Temari shot out accusingly, as she lightly glared at the girl. "I was considering it." Kin agreed with a nod of her head before lightly tapping the side of her mask with her needle. "But no, I'm going to tell you. When Sand comes crawling back, renegotiate the treaty. Make no mistake about it, after the ass-kicking they got, they will be. When that happens, you, dear, get to be part of an appropriation to encourage future good behavior. I get to be a hostage, joy." Temari made a face, as she lightly slumped back on the bed. "Actually, you're going to be spoiled." There was a kind of smug satisfaction that Kin felt, as she watched the look of growing horror crossing Temari's face. "You have to be fucking kidding me." Temari snarled softly, as she glared at Kin. "What the hell makes them think that?" "Because the leaf utterly crushed your invasion. They beat your secret weapon." "Hell, one genin beat your secret weapon." Kin smiled downright viciously at the girl. "They're going to accept it, because they don't have any choice but to do it. And you? Well, if you don't accept it, what do you think is going to happen, What happened to my brothers?" Temari finally asked, as she looked away, unable to keep Kin's gaze, as she stared at a nearby wall. Doll Boy was beaten by the guy he was supposed to fight in the exams anyway. Still, he managed to recover enough to help Gaara get away after his defeat. Of course, it helped that Naruto-sama let them go. Kin hummed thoughtfully before she lightly tapped her mask over her lips. "Anything else you want to know, Naruto-sama?" That immediately caught Temari's attention, as she stared at the girl in front of her. "What, you thought this was just for show?" Kin smirked slightly, as she lightly tapped on the collar at her throat with her, before she pulled down her mask to reveal her face. "Who do you think told them what was going to happen?" "You," but Temari's eyes went wide, as she stared at Kin. "You're that girl from Hidden Sound?" Slowly a sinking, almost sickening realization hit her, as she stared in absolute disbelief. the one that he beat. Kin agreed with a happy little nod of her head, as she casually pulled the mask back up over her face. And really, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Considering that Naruto-sama isn't likely to send me on a suicide mission like Orochimaru did. She shrugged slightly before continuing to twirl her. It was a simple question of would I choose the man who sent me to die without caring, or the boy who comforted me when I broke down and cried, knowing that I was just ordered to kill him. Which one would you choose? Temari stared at the girl, trying to work the words past her lips, as she frowned slightly before growling just slightly. You still turned traitor to your village. I betrayed a village that gave me no loyalty, founded by one of the most infamous traitors in the elemental countries. Kin snorted softly, and shook her head. To a village that actually wanted me, and wants to see me become the strongest I could be. So yes, I turned fucking traitor on a worthless place where you're just as likely to end up in one of our leader's experiments, as being lucky enough to be allowed to grow strong. Wincing slightly, Temari looked away, as she remembered her own father's approach to things, including his treatment of Gaara. So, what makes them think that you won't turn traitor from this one then? Besides the fact that I actually like it here? Kin smirked beneath her mask, before shrugging slightly, as she casually removed her cool gray jacket, and turned around, revealing her bare back, and the spiral-shaped seal in the center of it, over her heart. This, Temari swallowed audibly, as Kin turned back around, and met her forest green eyes with her own almost black orbs. They're going to put one of those on me. It wasn't a question, as she stared back at Kin, who shrugged casually in response. Comes with more perks than it does downsides. Kin smirked slightly, and slowly shook her head with a soft, amused smile. Naruto-sama might not look like it, but he's got more chakra than most ever will, and it's still growing. Chakra I get access to. She paused a moment, before shrugging slightly. Apparently it's increasing my own coils passively on its own, as well. I will say this much for the old pervert, he certainly knows his seals. Old pervert? Temari couldn't help but allow her lips to twitch slightly in amusement. Oh, you probably know him, as Jiraiya of the Toad Sage. Kin resumed picking under her fingernails, as she glanced over Temari. You'll be introduced to him soon enough. So, basically you're saying I should just resign myself to being a slave. Temari noted bitterly, as she lightly glared at Kin. Probably easier for me since I've been one in everything, but named for years under Orochimaru. Kin waved her hand lightly, dismissively for a moment, before smirking back at Temari. So, have you figured out how Naruto-sama kicked your ass yet? Temari frowned for a moment, as she thought back on the fight with a much clearer head now, as she furrowed her brow and thought. My attacks weren't even touching him. Not even the slightest bit of my wind reached him. True enough, he apparently was rather disappointed in you. Kin almost giggled at the expression of annoyance on Temari's face. It'll be even worse if you can't figure out how he did what he did. Frowning again, the Suna girl pursed her lips, as she thought back through the fight, before flinching visibly, as she recalled the final moments, where her fan had been destroyed with one simple swipe of the boy's hand. The frown only grew, as she focused on the utterly clean, impossibly clean cut that had gone through the steel lengths of both sides of her fan. Then she remembered the way his hands had been curled into claws, and her face paled again. That last move, the claws of the wind tiger? Only one claw currently, but he's only been at it a week or so. Kin waved her hand dismissively before smirking with a shrug. Give him a month or so, and he'll have it down. A month? Temari just stared at the girl incredulously, as she shook her head. That's impossible. It takes years, and years worth of training in raw, pure elemental manipulation before you can even learn enough to slow realization hit Temari, as she couldn't help but stare, as Kin's smirk only grew. You have got to be kidding me. Really? Did I say something to which you're referring, or are you just saying that in general? Kin noted dryly, as she shook her head, and chuckled just a bit. Because I get the feeling you're going to be reacting like that a lot around Naruto-sama. Temari took a moment to suck in a deep, calming breath, before she worked furiously to steel her mind before continuing. All right, claws of the wind tiger. So, he's a wind user. But he didn't make any attacks, so she frowned further, as she thought over what she knew about the situation before her face rapidly paled. Oh, did you finally get an inkling of what it is he did? Kin shook her head before snorting softly, as she growled just a bit. He cut my wind. Temari started, unable to fully process that simple statement, as she stared at the girl in front of her. No one in Suna could do that. Hell, I don't know of anyone fucking anywhere ever having done that, considering the chakra requirements for it, and the amount of time it would take to figure it out. Kin snickered softly before shaking her head. It's just the most basic of wind elemental manipulation. 2 projections of wind chakra, grinding on each other until they're a razor-sharp edge. After that, any attack just follows the path of least resistance, and flows right around him. Temari finished, as she slumped back, and banged her head back against the head of the bed. With him looking like he's doing it so easily, just to piss me off. It worked after all. Kin shot back, and rolled her eyes slightly, as she settled down in a chair again. You were set up, and you fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, like a sucker. Temari glared back at the girl, as her eyes narrowed into forest green slits. Oh yes, I can see we're just going to get along so well. Heh. Kin smirked slightly before she shrugged just a bit. I'm a bitch, what can I say? She shook her head, and the smirk immediately slid off her face. You think I want to be here, dealing with you right now? Well, you're obviously taking such joy in my company. Temari countered with an acidic hiss of breath. Yeah, what do you know? I like tempting my inner sadist right now. Kin kept spinning through her fingers before she shook her head, staring out the nearby window before her eyes flashed back to Temari with a glare. Like I said, the old man deserved better than he got. And this is my fault, how? Temari snarled back, as she glared at the girl. I didn't even want anything to do with this stupid invasion. Now I get to be a slave because of the idiocy of Win's daimyo, and my father's. I don't even want to think about whatever it was my father did. I'd be more sympathetic, I really would, except, well, Kin paused a moment, as if in consideration before spitting back. I honestly don't give a rat's ass. Life sucks at times, get over it, and quit whining about it. You were on the wrong side. You're paying for it. Oh, that makes me feel so much better. Temari shot back in an acidic hiss of breath. Like I care about making you feel better. Kin countered, as she snorted loudly. I'm more pissed off that Naruto-sama's going to be stuck with a stupid bitch like you. That's enough, Kin-chan. The voice cut in softly, as a worn-looking Naruto stepped forward, moving near silent, as he glanced towards Temari for a moment, inclining head slightly to the bound girl. Evenin', sunshine, don't call me that. Temari growled softly, as she glared at the boy who, if the former sound Kunoichi was to be believed, would soon be her master. It does seem to fit her. Another voice chimed in, as Jiraiya appeared behind Naruto, his own face displaying a worn tiredness, as he glanced over the girl, even, as he tried to force a smile on his lips. Alright, I'm going to guess by the looks that the little bitch here has filled you in on things, The silent glare he received back, merely made the man snort softly in amusement. Girl, I've been glared at by the best. And you've got nothing on Tsunadeheim. One of these days, you'll have to introduce me to her. Naruto spoke up with a bored expression on his face, as he sighed slightly, and shook his head. What with the way everyone seems to react about her? She's the granddaughter of the first Hokage. Jiraiya shrugged a bit, as again something flashed across his eyes, as he looked towards Naruto. She, Asuma, and that brat Konohamaru are about as close as you get to royalty around here. Yeah? I know Shika, and Chuji's teacher. Naruto waved his hand slightly, and sighed, as he slumped down. The old man's son. Your Kin started up, a slight smirk curling across her face. No, I'm not. Naruto growled back, as he sent a slight glare towards Kin, as his arms crossed about his chest, and he gave a slight huff of annoyance. Well, yes I am, but that's because I'm trying to forget about her. Oh, come on, the bimbo's not that bad. Kin noted with a smug little smirk on her face, as she lightly continued to twirl her in her fingers. She started calling me Naruto-kun. Naruto countered with a soft growl, as he glared slightly at Kin. And again, I blame you for this. Does that mean you'll give me a spanking? Kin spoke up, her eyes gleaming hopefully, as she squirmed suggestively in her seat. Damn it! Naruto groaned softly, as he proceeded to bang his head against his palm, and groaned out loud. Jiraiya merely sighed, as Kin continued to smirk slightly while she crossed her arms about her chest. Do you have to do that now? Temari just lay there for a moment, staring at the three before groaning softly, as she half closed her eyes. You're all insane. Darlin', considering who your father was, I highly doubt that you've got any claim to being a paragon of sanity. Jiraiya drawled out before shaking his head, as he gave Kin a slight, meaningful look. It was then, as she referred to her father in the past tense, that it finally hit her. Her father, the Kazekage, was dead, just like her mother, her uncle, and the rest of her family beyond her brothers. For a moment, she lay there, letting that simple truth sink in, before she offered up a question hesitantly. How did he die? Orochimaru. Jiraiya answered with a bitter twist of his features before he shook his head. Before he even reached Konoha. Days ago probably. So, not only was my father an idiot, he's an idiot who got himself killed by the person who masterminded this mess. Temari spat out bitterly, as she slowly shook her head. Lovely. Someone sounds bitter. Kin observed with a falsely sweet smirk on her face before she casually shook her head. Kin-chan. Naruto raised his head, and gave the girl a slight, tired glare. Leave Sunshine here alone. Stop calling me that. Temari growled softly, as her dark green eyes flashed back at the boy. I have a name. Yes, so? Kin answered before Naruto could respond. You might, as well, get used to it, sunshine. You're a bitch, you can. Yes, she does. Naruto cut in before Temari could finish. We've called her on it repeatedly. Eventually she just starts to give you a yes and, look, eventually? Kin gave Naruto an utterly amused look before she glanced over at Jiraiya. I thought I did that straight off. Sometimes, the white-haired man offered with a shrug before his lips curled back into a small, smug grin. Others, they're just ents. Ah. Kin nodded sagely, as she lightly rubbed her hands together. The ones like Naruto-sama. I'd be offended, Naruto noted with a careful glance towards Kin. But considering how hard I worked to ignore her insinuations, a very true statement. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head. He does work hard to ignore those insinuations, alright. He does it just to frustrate me, Kin declared confidently, as she crossed her arms about her chest with a firm canting bob of her head. I do it because she's crazy, Naruto countered, as he locked eyes with Temari, and refused to look at Kin. You're all insane. There was a note of sheer disbelief in Temari's voice, as she stared at the three in front of her, and repeated her earlier statement. I'm not insane, Naruto declared rather firmly, before pointing his finger from Kin to Jiraiya. They are. I just got caught up in the craziness, says the kid with enough clones to make his own army? Jiraiya shot back before shaking his head slightly, and looking over Temari. There are ANBU guards set around the building, so if you try to escape, well, I can't believe you told them to strip her down to her underwear, and leave her hog-tied in my bed if they catch her trying to leave. Naruto muttered quietly before shaking his head with a sigh. And I can't believe they listened. Temari's eyes widened incredulously back at the blonde boy before she turned her head, and stared at the smirking Jiraiya. You have got to be. Nope, he's not. Jiraiya agreed with a sage nod of his head, and rubbed at his chin for a moment. Of course, he's not mentioning the pictures. Try, and I swear no one's going to take any pictures, Naruto put in quickly, before his face hardened just a bit. Because you're not going to give him a reason to. Got it, sunshine? Why the hell do you insist on calling me that? I like it, he said simply, before grinning impishly, as he reached forward, and lightly patted her atop her head. Plus, it's fun to see you getting all worked up. Standing up then, he tiredly shook his head, and glanced at the other two. I'm going to bed. We can do the seal for sunshine here tomorrow night. And with that he turned, ignoring the flushed face of Temari before vanishing from the room out the door. After a moment's pause, Kin's brain slowly processed the full extent of things. Wait, if she's there, couch. Could be heard echoing past the door. And floor for you. But, I know you, Kin-chan. You won't keep those damned hands of yours to yourself. Damn it. The girl muttered softly, as she shook her head, giving a sour glare to the visibly amused Jiraiya. Not a word, you. Oh no, not a single word. Jiraiya agreed before turning his attention back to Temari, as Kin fumed. Why don't you go bug your master? I need to have a word with our little princess here. Right. Kin rolled her eyes just a bit before shrugging her shoulders, and glancing at Temari. If he starts to grope you, scream. It'll probably help me sleep better. Temari stared at Kin for a long moment, before shaking her head in disgust. Bitch. Yup, Kin affirmed, as she threw an extra little sway in her hips, as she turned, and walked out of sight. Heh. Kids these days. Jiraiya chuckled slowly before shaking his head, as he turned his attention back to Temari, as he settled down into a seat, and studied her for a long moment. I suppose you have some questions? What would be the point? Temari hissed back, as she glared slightly at the man. I'm just a piece of property now, remember? Oh, I can see what he likes to call you, sunshine. The shook his head, and chuckled just a bit, as he lightly pursed his lips and thought. Well, let's see, where to begin. Your brothers are fine. Whether or not your sensei lives will depend on how much Yugao can keep a leash on her temper. At the girl's look of confusion, Jiraiya shook his head. He tried to kill her lover. She didn't take that well. She blinked at that, before blinking again, and staring at the man. What? Her lover, the original proctor of the third stage, stumbled on a little intelligence swap between Orochimaru's mole in Konoha, and your instructor. Your instructor then tried to kill him to cover up the discovery of the meat. Jiraiya paused, lightly rubbing his chin in consideration. Fortunately for Hate, your instructor was already under surveillance, albeit from a much greater distance, and he identified Baki-sensei as his attacker. Temari supplied, as she slowly closed her eyes and shook her head a bit. So did the ANBU tailing him, Jiraiya pointed out with a shrug of his shoulders, before smiling benignly back at the girl. You can always try to talk Yugao out of insisting on any irreparable harm. She'll probably show up to escort the brat to Sensei's funeral. How can you be so damned calm about this? Temari growled softly, as she glared up at the man. Everything that happened, hell, your teacher just died. I'm a ninja girl. And a ninja is someone who endures, Jiraiya stated flatly, as he slowly shook his head. Sensei chose that path. I know the technique he used, better than anyone still alive in fact. He gave his life, freely, and willingly. He died with a smile on his face. He's just one more name on a long list of people I've cared about that I've had to bury. The simplicity of the statement caught Temari off guard, as she stared up at the man, before averting her eyes, as a flash of guilt bubbled up in her throat. As her silence hung in the air, Jiraiya simply nodded his head, and rose up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day for you. That said, Temari was left in darkness and silence, as she contemplated what he had told her. Sakura Haruno stared in numb disbelief at the figures laid out on the cold, uncaring slab in front of her. She couldn't quite seem to connect it, not yet the fact that these pale, cold figures, with blank, unseeing eyes were actually her parents, her loving, and oh so very alive mother and father who had been so proud of their little girl for having the strength to become a ninja. I'm sorry to do this, but we need proper identification of the remains. A quiet voice spoke up, as numbly Sakura recognized it, as one of the medics standing behind her. And even with everything we knew about in advance, there were a great number of casualties. The words were thick on her tongue, as she struggled to complete a sentence, before the tears began to pour down her cheeks. Are they your parents? The voice was gentle, even with the edge of impatience scored with a frustrated weariness. Yes. The word came hiccuped on her lips, as she struggled not to collapse, as she couldn't seem to bring herself to look away from the bodies on the slabs. I'm sorry. It was a numb condolence. A clinical part of her mind noted it was probably due to the fact that this was far from the first, and probably far from the last that the medic would have to go through that day. Do you have anyone else that can take care of the funeral arrangements? My aunt, if she's still alive. Sakura murmured numbly before slowly shaking her head, reaching out towards her mother's cold body before jerking her hand back before she could touch the cold skin. I'll have someone contact her, the medic stated quite politely, with a canting nod of the head before quietly gesturing towards the door. I really don't want to sound rude, but you have other people to see about identifying the bodies, Sakura mumbled quietly, as she shuffled forward, eyes still half glazed. Yes, the medic said with a quiet firmness, as a hand was laid on Sakura's shoulder, and a light pressure moved her away from the bodies, and towards the door. Again, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you? It was half whispered, as it left her lips, but she moved steadily forward, feet brushing across the cool stone floors, as she seemed to wander back out of the hospital without any real destination in mind. Sakura? The voice was vaguely familiar, but she didn't quite recognize it, as she turned her head, and saw a vaguely familiar blur topped with silvery hair. What are you doing here? Numbly, helplessly she turned, and gestured towards the morgue before looking back at Blur, as the tears began to flow down her cheeks in a silvery stream of tears. As she fought back the urge to collapse, crumpled to her knees. Kakashi froze a moment, as he stared down at the girl, as unbidden memories of his own childhood flashed across his mind, before he reached down, and gently placed his hand on the girl's shoulder, as he crouched down. What happened, Sakura? The invasion there, their home. Their words were thick, as they left her lips, as she struggled to look into her teacher's face. Some sound came across them, and they were civilians. A whimper left her lips, as she broke into a series of pulsing sobs, as she buried her face into Kakashi's vest. For a moment, he crouched there, frozen in surprise by her action, before gently he reached up, enfolding her in his arms with far less awkwardness than he would have thought, and gently rubbed against her back. I'm sorry, Sakura. They weren't going to hurt anyone. They couldn't stop them. A frantic look flashed across her eyes, as she stared back at Kakashi. Why? For a moment, Kakashi simply held on to the girl, uncertain how to answer her, and her question, as a slight well of guilt began to pulse up from inside of him. The truth, Sakura? She froze at that, staring up at him, as she could feel the urge to immediately shake her head, to tell him to just tell her that it was an accident, that they couldn't have meant to kill them. Instead, she could feel the way her head nodded slowly, up and down, and the pit in her stomach sank even further. A soft sigh left Kakashi's lips before he shook his head. Because they were ordered to. Because Orochimaru wants Konoha to burn, not just the shinobi, but every man, woman, and child. Because that is what shinobi have to do at times. What? Sakura stared up at Kakashi, as the horrified realization hit her, and struggled to break free from his firm, gentle hold. No, I couldn't. I wouldn't. Konoha wouldn't. Kakashi agreed with a quiet nod of his head before shaking his head. At least, we wouldn't call for indiscriminate killing like this. But he paused there, his face growing hard, as he stared down into Sakura's eyes. We kill Sakura. That is a part of what being a ninja means, if you can't handle that. She hung her head, tears flowing fresh down her cheeks, as she shivered heavily. If I can't handle that, I don't have any place being a ninja, do I? It hurts to lose people, Sakura, Kakashi stated simply, as he gently turned his head, glancing off into the distance, unerringly looking straight towards the memorial that would soon have new names inscribed on it. I know that better than anyone. But you still have a duty to do. We are ninja, we're still human, yes, but we must endure. Sakura looked up at him for a moment, before hanging her head again. I keep seeing them, lying there so lifeless, and Sakura, you have time to learn to deal with it, Kakashi stated softly, as he again placed his hand on her shoulder. Everything is still fresh. Deal with it, face it, and you'll be able to move on. Otherwise it will haunt you. Slowly she nodded her head, looking up at him for a moment, eyes still gleaming with fresh spilt tears. Where I don't even know where I can stay. My home is gone. You're friends with the Yamanaka girl, Ino, right? Kakashi pointed out, as he gently squeezed the girl on her shoulder. I'm sure her parents will be happy to help you with everything. She looked up at her teacher with tear-stained, half-unseeing eyes. Sighing slightly, Kakashi nodded his head, as he gently squeezed her shoulder. Come on, I'll walk you there. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. She mumbled softly, nodding her head, as she quietly stumbled along next to him. For a moment, he stared down at the girl with a pulse of emotion welling up inside of him, and he cursed Orochimaru for taking away his student's innocence far too quickly. Rio, for your thoughts? Anko didn't even bother glancing back, as the voice pierced through the night sky, as she sat quietly atop the carved face of the third on the Hokage monument. A half-empty bottle of sake settled next to her. Why? Doubt they'd be worth it, Yugao. The purple-haired woman slid down next to Anko, shrugging her shoulders just a bit, as she settled into place, knees pulled back, as she rested her chin lightly at her knees. You never know. Yeah, true enough. Anko shrugged her shoulders, before lifting up the bottle, and offering it towards her companion. So, how's Hate doing? Yugao took the bottle without a word, taking a quiet sip before lightly settling it back down between them. According to the medics, they doubt they'll be able to bring him back to where he was before. Considering how he was to start off with, Anko grimaced, as she nodded her head, before reaching down, and taking the bottle herself for a sip of her own. What's he saying about it? Don't know, Yugao admitted, as she kept staring out into the village. He won't really talk to me very much. I think he's getting tired of trying. Bullshit. Anko shot back, and snorted softly. Hayate's too much of a stubborn fucker to just give up. Maybe. Seriously? Anko blinked a bit, as she stared back at the dull way Yugao had spoken, and arched her brow back at her. That's bad? That Sanjounen messed him up. Badly, Yugao admitted, as she leaned into her legs a bit more. They barely put him back together again, and without Tsunade-sama. Heard it's the same for guys' kids too, Anko admitted quietly. Both those boys that Gaara kid fucked them both up. There was a pause, before a slightly triumphant gleam entered into her eyes. But you heard what the brat did, didn't you? A slow, faint smile graced the imbue's lips, and she nodded her head quietly. Yes, I did. Then the frown faded a bit, as she glanced over at Anko. Did you hear about what the Hokage III set up for the Sand Kunoichi Genin? Haven't really been paying much attention to the rumor mill. Anko answered back with a shrug. Was busy killing those sound and sand fuckers that were running around killing civvies. She's ending up with the brat, like the bitch. Yugao answered simply, as she offered Anko back a shrug of her own. A soft whistle filled the air before Anko bit off a laugh, and shook her head. Heh, poor kid, he's just gonna be swamped in trouble, isn't he? You do remember her teacher was the one who did that to Hate, right? Yugao shot back with a slight flower in her eyes. Yes, so? That was her teacher, not her. Anko gave the woman a simple, flat, penetrating look. Or are you going to blame me for what my teacher did? Well, no. She faltered at that, wincing slightly, as she could feel the simple reminder hitting hard. It's just, Yugao, just shut up before I hurt you. Anko growled softly, as she turned her head, and glared back at her friend, who shrank back instinctively under her gaze. It's just as the reason why I went through hell for years because of what he did. I didn't even know about the shit he did, but I still got blamed for it. You know what the fuck I went through, now you're telling me you're going to turn around and do it to someone fucking else? This is different, Yugao growled softly, as she glared back at Anko stubbornly. You never went traitor. She was part of a plot to betray the treaty and wipe us out, and she was a ninja, following orders. Anko countered back with a snort and a shake of her head. What, you'd rather that she had turned traitor first? Kin did. Yugao muttered softly, as she reached down, snatching the sake bottle, and taking a gulp. Yeah, Well, Kin was given a fucking death sentence for no reason other than it amused the fucker. Anko snapped back, and snorted softly. You have to actually give loyalty to get it back. Yugao growled softly in frustration, as she took another drink from the bottle. Want someone to pay? Anko nodded her head slightly, as she gazed out over the village. I get it, I really fucking do. Why the fuck do you think I haven't started gutting people who refuse to see that I'm not like that bastard teacher of mine? I know. Yugao growled a bit, and sighed, as she hung her head. I just couldn't find that fucker during the invasion, and now they're not likely to let you take it out of his hide. Anko finished with a nod of her head. And you're worried that if you start talking with the little ray of sunshine, you'll not want to go do something stupid, and will remember that the guy was just doing it under orders, like we would. Yugao stared back at Anko, and glared at her before she took another drink. Damn it, you're supposed to be the bloodthirsty one telling me to go do it, not convincing me not to. Sorry. Anko drawled out insincerely, as she rolled her eyes. Come back when I'm sober after my buzz is gone. No thanks, then you'll kill him yourself, and not save anything for me. Yugao shot back, as she rolled her own eyes before setting the bottle down on the stone between them. I have to just let it go, don't I? You could always just call his head in advance if they ever tried to fuck with us again. Anko offered with a lazy shrug of her shoulders before looking back out across the village. Damn it. Yugao half whined out before sighing, as she huffed just a bit, and flopped back onto the cool stone. This a private party over here, or can a few others join in? A new voice cut in, as a turn of the head revealed Asuma and Kurenai standing, with a bottle of sake in the man's hand. Asuma. Anko nodded her head to the man before gesturing around them. It's your pop's head. Who would I be to deny you a seat? A grateful nod was given, as silently he settled down, staring out into the village with worn, weary eyes, as he settled the bottle down onto the cooled stone. Thanks. Hard to believe he's actually gone. She had let the silence hang for a moment, a kind of respectful passing, as Kurenai slid down, taking a seat between her and Asuma, before she spoke again. Always figured the old man would always be there, outliving us all. Yeah, Pops always seemed to be invincible. Asuma agreed with a slow canting nod of his head, as he looked out across the village, before he flicked open his lighter, and lit the tip of his cigarette. I mean all three of the great wars, and the pieces in between them. I kind of always figured, no matter how far I ran off, he'd always be here, waiting for me to come back. He nodded his head quietly, as he could feel the slight, squeezing pressure of Kurenai's hand on his, glancing at her with a slight smile on his lips, as he felt the warmth of her skin pressing into his own, as her voice softly filled the air. He'll always be here though, looking out over the village. Maybe, Anko admitted with a shrug of her shoulders before she took a drink of her own. But still won't be the same. There aren't many left that could tell us about the first, and second because they knew them, trained under them, fought by their side. That's the way it goes. A new voice spoke up, as Kakashi nodded his head to the rest, while settling down with his own sake bottle. Time moves on. All we can do is savor the time we have with those we care about while they're still with us, then wait for the days when we go to join them. Yes, but in the meantime, we still have lives to live, and time to enjoy. Kurenai shot back, as she slowly shook her head, and glanced out across the slightly ravaged buildings of Konoha. Doing our best to set forth a most youthful example. Guy's voice cut in, though somberly lacking its usual vigor, to show that our flames of youth are not quenched. Asuma chuckled softly, as he glanced back over his shoulder, watching, as jounin after jounin began to trickle in, filling the tops of the Hokage's heads, as they stared out across their home. For a time, there was silence, and peace, the air hanging with a somber note, as they bowed their heads in respect. Then, when Asuma lifted his head high again, he lifted up his bottle of sake, and spoke in a clear tone everyone could hear. To Konoha's will of fire. May she never gutter out. To the will of fire. Naruto groaned softly, as he slowly came awake, shifting out of the rather uncomfortable position he was in, before blinking slightly, as he glanced at the body curled next to his. Didn't I tell you to sleep on the floor? Kin sleepily opened her eyes, and glanced at Naruto before shrugging slightly, as she snuggled into him. Couldn't sleep, too used to you lying next to me. It's only been a month, Naruto pointed out, as he gave the girl a half-hearted glare. So? A lazy smirk curled onto her lips, as she lightly looked at him with half-lidded eyes, before frowning slightly. Besides, this is likely the last night I'll have you all to myself. Eh? Why? Naruto blinked slightly at the girl, confusion written across his face, as he instinctively began to run his fingers through her hair. Where do you think Sunshine is going to be staying? Kin countered back with a slight, half-glare at Naruto before shaking her head, and sighing, as she laid her head on his chest. Ba wa. Naruto blinked a moment, then again, before he stared back at Kin. Wait, she's gonna? Where did you think she'd sleep? Kin shot back, and rolled her eyes. I kinda figured I'd get her a futon, and leave her there. Naruto admitted with a shrug, and a sheepish grin. Oh. Kin blinked slightly, then blinked again. That works. As she immediately curled even more tightly against his chest, Naruto sighed, and rolled his eyes. Of course, I could also do the same thing with Yo-OW. The slight growl Kin gave off, as she kept her teeth buried in his chest, as she glared up at him almost made him sweat drop, before he reached down, and firmly pinched her side. Stop that! Oh, don't you dare! Kin hissed softly, as she glared back at her master. This is my spot, and I'm not giving it up for anyone. Okay, that's it. Naruto suddenly grabbed the girl, and rolled them both off of his couch, landing atop her with a heavy thud, as he glared down at the girl who stared up at him with wide, blinking eyes. You're a bitch, I get it. But you're my bitch. Stop treating me like I'm your own personal little chew toy. For a moment, Kin blinked, then blinked again, staring owlishly back up at him, before the words slipped out past her mouth before she could even think. Or else what? Naruto stared back at the girl for a moment, his eyes conflicted, as he visibly struggled to come up with an answer. As he remained silent, the owlish look was slowly replaced by a growing sneer curling up her lips. Yeah, there is no or else, is there? Before he could answer, she lunged forward, and bit him again, digging her teeth into his skin again, earning an angry yelp in response, as he roughly grabbed hold of her, and shoved her back down. Damn it! I told you to. Yeah? So? You think I should listen to you just because you tell me to? Kin snarled back at him, as she started to struggle back against his weight. I told you, you have to prove you're strong enough to keep me. You think all this pussyfooting around, being nice, and crap is proving anything? So what, you want me to beat the shit out of you? He snarled back at her, as suddenly he jammed his hand down next to her head, as suddenly she could see strands of her hair flying up into the air, along with flecks of sawdust. You want me to cut you? Rip you apart? Is that what you want? Huh! She could feel the sudden pressure of her heart, hammering in her chest, as she stared up at him, eyes suddenly wide, as she could feel the sudden flush of heat rising up her cheeks, staring into his eyes, before suddenly she could feel the way his hands grabbed hold of her hair, not waiting for a response. A startled shriek left her lips, a flash of dull pain, as she was forced up, before he twisted them both around, pinning her onto her chest with a growl. That brief instant of shock and desire gave way to a sudden flush of anger, as she suddenly shifted, elbows flying back, trying to strike into him, as she kicked her legs awkwardly back, as she bucked her hips back at him. Then she felt her nails meeting his flesh, and she clawed, not even bothering to put words to her voice, merely snarling back at him, as her eyes flashed angrily. Then she felt his knee, digging down into the small of her back, pinning her down into place, as an instant later, her wrists were caught in the rough flesh of his calloused hands. She fought, even harder then, trying to buck him off, to force him away, even, as she felt the way he forced her arms back, pinning them behind her back. A sudden wet pulse of fear and desperation curled up from inside of her, and drove her into a panic struggle. Smack! Instantly she still felt the blow to her naked ass. Dimly, a part of her mind recognized that her sleeping shirt had ridden up during their struggles, exposing her completely, but it simply didn't fully process. Then came another, then another, as she bit back a whimper that threatened to well up from the depths of her throat. Only 5 slaps onto her tender flesh, and then he was shifting, the weight releasing from her back, as she glanced back at him with a look that mixed incredulity with disappointment. He wasn't done, however. She could feel the way he grabbed hold of her hair, his hands still holding firmly onto her wrists behind her back, as he rose, pulling her to her feet with him. Then, he sat, and she collapsed back across his lap in an oh-so-familiar position, and suddenly her struggles began anew. Smack! It stilled her again, as her eyes widened, and she could hear the way his voice slowly broke the heavy silence that had filled the air. This is what you wanted, wasn't it? Forced down, put across my lap. A sudden stinging smack struck her ass again. Are you happy now? Huh? Isn't this what you wanted? She whimpered, so softly that she wasn't sure a sound had actually left her throat, as she hung her head, tears slowly streaming out of her eyes, even, as she slowly pushed her ass back up against his hand, as a single word blurted past her lips. More. His grip instantly went slack, as he stared at her, his hand limp, as the sheer disbelief entered his voice. What? Please, Naruto-sama, please. More. It was said in a soft, almost whimpering voice, as he stared down at her, her whole body rigid across his lap, as her voice trembled with shame. Please, please, please. Suddenly realization struck him, and he could go rigid, disgust rolling over his features, as he moved to suddenly remove her from his lap, to stand, to run, and get away, to be anywhere, but here. Only, Her freed hands were now gripping tightly onto his legs, as she refused to let him go, her tear-stained face lifting up, as she stared not quite into his eyes, staring down at his mouth, his nose, anywhere, but those sudden, panicking eyes. Don't stop. Just don't stop. Prove it. Show me you're not gonna run, please. Please, Naruto-sama, show me I'm worth it. He stilled, the panic still pounding in his chest, as he stared down at the girl, eyes wide, as he could feel himself, torn between the sudden, panicking fear, and the calm, steady whisper in the back of his mind, telling him to do what she asked. Then her face pulled away, tears streaking down anew, as anger started to hiss into her breath. Fine, so fucking be it, master. She said that word with such disdain he flinched, like it was an insult, as he could feel her suddenly pulling away, letting go of his leg. Did I say you could get up? He wasn't sure where he found the strength to speak, he wasn't sure how he found the words, as suddenly he could see the contented smile on Haku's lips, as he slowly slumped down off Kakashi's arm onto the cool, unfeeling concrete of the bridge. He could see the tears in Zabuza's eyes, as he spoke, as he asked for his last, simple favors, before dying so willingly for the one he called his tool. And it shattered, as he watched Orochimaru, smirking coldly, unfeelingly down at the girl who had gone still across his lap, discarding her like she was nothing but trash, throwing her away. What was that, master? Again it was hissed, the venom only growing now, as she seemed to shake off the sudden way his question had sent a hopeful shiver down her spine. I said, did I tell you that you could get up? Strength was growing, as he reached down, grabbing hold of her hair again, as she went rigid against his touch. What do you think, some? Smack! It cut her off in mid-word, as she froze again, swallowing, visibly, loudly, as she hung her head, letting the dark veil of her hair fall across her eyes. Silent, rigid, she waited. And the question remained, could he continue? Smack! Again it came, almost tentative, but growing stronger, more assured before it fell again. A solid blow, in fact, before another, then another fell, each firmer, more confident, as his bare hand struck down on her naked flesh. Finally a soft, muffled sob broke past her lips, one single wet sound, and then it was like a dam had suddenly broken. He continued, moving into a slow, almost steady rhythm, as the racking sobs left her lips, and the tears spilled down her cheeks. A moment's hesitation, as he heard her cries, uncertainty warring within him, before he could a tremor of emotion in her crying voice that made his eyes widen again. Relief. The next strike half faltered, but quickly formed itself again at the next, and she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks, throat catching, as she simply let go. Finally, after time later Heather was certain of just how long, she raised her head, nuzzling lightly against his hand. By sudden mutual understanding, the blows stopped, and without a word she shifted up, curling against his chest, as his fingers instinctively ran through her hair. They were quieter now, more subdued, as they left her lips. A gentle pulse of motion, as he felt the way her arms wrapped themselves about his chest. Finally, after long, lingering moments, her head lifted, and she looked up at him with red-rimmed, tear-stained eyes, and spoke in a thick, raw voice. Thank you, Naruto-sama. He nodded, a small slightly smile curling over his lips, before he pulled off his shirt, and carefully wiped her eyes and face clean with it. I'm sorry, Kin-chan, I didn't understand how much you needed that. I didn't know how much I needed it. Kin answered back with a slow shake of her head, smiling slightly, as she could feel the tenderness he took in helping her clean, before a slight, impish smile curled over her lips. Does this mean if I tell you I need it, you'll join me in the shower? Not a chance, he stated flatly, as he gave her a look before leaning in, and kissing her atop her head. Not right now, at least, drat. She made a weak giggle in response, before grabbing hold of him, and hugging him tight. Go take your shower then, master. I'm probably gonna need to take a while with mine, and I don't want to keep you waiting. You sure, Kin-chan? A slight uncertainty was in his voice, as he lightly brushed his fingers against her cheek. Yeah, go on. She smiled slightly before sliding off his lap, and nudging him. Just don't take up all the hot water. That's you, not me. He muttered softly before shaking his head, and wandering over to the bathroom. Smiling slightly, Kin turned then settled back on the couch, before wincing heavily, as she felt the soreness on her rear. Damn it, that hurts. Well, I think that falls into the no-duh category there. A familiar voice drawled out, as Kin instantly stiffened before slowly, reluctantly turning around to see the familiar face of Anko smirking down at her. Fuck. She paused, staring up at the woman. You saw? Of course you did. A groan left her lips, before she buried her face in her hands. Fuck. What, you think anyone around here could have missed your little spat? Anko chuckled a bit before she canted her head lightly to the side, and shook her head, as she flopped down onto the couch next to the girl. Just think of what the blonde Suna girl is thinking. Oh hell. I forgot about Sunshine. Kin paled visibly, as she kept her hands buried in her face. Damn it all. Don't worry about it. Anko waved her hand negligently before chuckling softly, as she canted her head to the side. So, feeling better now that you finally got what you wanted? She froze in place at the woman's words, before slowly looking up, staring at her for a long moment, before her dark eyes took on a look of honest speculation. Then slowly she nodded her head. Yeah, actually, I think I did. This means you're going to be a good, well-behaved girl now? Anko's eyes danced playfully, as she let the smirk grow across her lips. Kin stared back at her incredulously, before snorting, loudly in response. Oh hell no. Do I look like one of those goody-goody girls that always behave? Nah, but I figured I'd tease you about it anyway. Anko agreed with a slow little chuckle before shaking her head, as her face grew serious. You know that was a dangerous game you played there. Kin blinked a moment, before flushing slightly, as she hung her head. Just after everything, you felt you needed to push it. Anko nodded her head slightly before continuing to affix Kin with a look. The problem being, he's been through things, as much as you this last month. What would have happened if he hadn't reacted the right way? My life would have gotten really shitty, really quickly. Kin stated simply before shrugging her shoulders, as she hung her head. I would have probably kept pushing, and pushing, and pushing, and if he kept not reacting the right way, I would have kept pushing things until I was probably dead. Yup, probably. Anko agreed with a nod of her head, before flicking the girl's forehead sternly. And how would the brat have reacted to that? Not well? There was a quiet admission in her voice, as she winced, and hung her head slightly. Very, very not well. A nod of agreement was given, as Anko casually threw a glance towards the bathroom door, before chuckling a bit. Though next time, might want to make it more private. What do you think would have happened if the old pervert had walked in on you too? In a scene like that, he would keep his mouth shut, and not interfere. Jiraiya's voice answered them, as both females suddenly widened their eyes, and whirled around to stare at the somber looking. There wasn't anything kinky, or perverted about that. Have you seen it? Kin almost squeaked out the words before burying her face in her hands, and groaning audibly. Oh joy, wonderful, great. Jiraiya snorted slightly, and rolled his eyes a bit. Grow up. My readers like girls moaning, and begging for more like naughty, kinky girls, not girls breaking down, and into sobbing messes when they're spanked. That's just not sexy. So glad you noticed. Kin spat back bitterly, as she lightly glared at Jiraiya. Eesh, down girl, don't make me get the muzzle. Jiraiya chuckled softly. I really don't want to know. Naruto's voice broke in, as he walked back into the room, half dressed in his pants, with his bare chest still slightly glistening from moisture. Kin-chan, showers free? Oh, thank the Camus. The girl muttered before quickly running off towards the show, pausing, almost impulsively to give a kiss to her master's cheek. You have perfect timing, Naruto-sama. Naruto blinked, blushing slightly, as Kin raced away before turning, and regarding the bemused looks on Anko and Jiraiya's faces. I really don't want to know, do I? What? We only wanted to congratulate you on such an excellent performance with your spoil. Anko offered with an overly innocent smile on her lips. Yes, you stumbled halfway through, but that was a nice recovery and finish. Jiraiya agreed with a pair of thumbs up directed at the boy. And yet they insist on telling me. Naruto muttered slightly, as he gave the pair a slight glare. Does everything I say just go in one ear, and out the other with you too? Nah, we only ignore what you say when it amuses us. Anko countered back with a curling smirk on her face. So, ready to get started on your little ray of sunshine? Already? Naruto blinked slightly, and stared at the woman. But I just got up. Kid, it's well past noon. You've been sleeping most of the day. Jiraiya supplied a chuckle. Let me tell you, that girl has been getting pretty antsy. Wonderful. Naruto muttered sourly before shaking his head with a soft sigh of resignation. Just got better and better. It was then he glanced down at the floor, and winced slightly, as he saw the small vertical hole he'd gouged in it. Ugh, and I gotta fix that too. Yup, our little brat is finally starting to turn into a man. Aren't you so proud? Anko snickered softly, as she turned her head, and smirked over at Jiraiya. Well, if it's bringing out the maternal side of you, I'd be happy to help you practice the whole process until you find someone. Jiraiya ducked the kunai Anko had thrown at him, and huffed back at her. Really, I was only offering. Can you not destroy my apartment? Naruto cut in, as he glared at Anko. Oh, oops. Temari grunted softly, as she heard the voices again, speaking up outside the room, as she struggled again against her bonds in no small amount of frustration. She'd been lying here, most of the night, wide awake, and stuck alone with her thoughts. Thoughts that weren't exactly pleasant. Then, finally a short time ago, she'd heard voices again, and she felt a sudden surge of hope that finally she'd be able to at least have someone to talk to. Then muffled voices had gotten angry, then a thud, more anger, before eventually audible sobbing, audible feminine sobbing, then murmured voices again. It made the dark pit in her stomach only grow with each passing moment, before she could hear the distant rumbling of the shower coming to life. For a time, she tensed up, expecting to suddenly have someone walk in on her at any moment. Any muffled sound she could have heard from the voices still in the living room had been drowned out by the quiet roar of the falling water. She relaxed, if only for a moment, as she again let her eyes fall closed, forcing herself to take slow and deep breaths. Only instantly she grew tensed up again the moment that the sounds of the shower stopped again. Instantly she could again hear the sound of voices in the distance, chattering about something she couldn't quite make out. Then, the door quietly swept open and shut, causing her eyes to snap open. What she saw made her stare at the dark-haired girl before her uncertainty. Kin's eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks still tinged slightly red, as she regarded the girl laying tied down on the bed. A moment later she sighed, and shook her head with a grumble, as she pulled off her sleeping shirt, and walked, now completely naked, across the room towards where she kept her clean clothes. In the process, she gave Temari a complete view of her almost uniformly red ass. She blurted out, uncertain of what exactly she should say, as she found her eyes staring at the tender, pale skin. Spanked me, yes, Kin noted with a sarcastic drawl of her lips, and a light roll of her head, as she canted her neck back, and gave her a patronizing look. Any other obvious observations you'd like to make, sunshine? Temari turned her head, and met those glaring eyes, before she found herself unable to keep looking into those strangely bemused-looking eyes. Why? Because I deserved it? Kin offered, as she glanced at Temari with her head canted to the side. Because I finally pushed him hard enough that he pushed back, and showed me that he's not some whiny little pushover? Because I needed to know if he could keep me or not? She snorted softly, and shook her head, as she picked up one of her clean, spare outfits, and after a moment's hesitation, pulled out the mask to go with it, as she glanced towards Temari again. Because, sunshine, we're property, and when we misbehave, we get punished. Same rules as the ninja world, only there's only ever going to be one person laying the punishment on you. You have more of a choice in the ninja world, Temari insisted, though her voice never quite made it above a whisper, causing Kin to snort again. Right. Kin rolled her eyes slightly, as she glanced at Temari with a smirk. Make up your mind, sunshine. Did you or did you not have a choice about things with the invasion? You know I didn't. Temari's eyes flashed with no small bit of anger, as Kin smirked back at her. Then deal with it, Kin stated flatly. You had a choice, you chose to not have one. That led to this. She half sneered at the girl, as she walked straight towards the room's entrance to the bathroom. Deal with the consequences, I did. With that, she shut the bathroom door on Temari's face, leaving the blonde girl alone again with her thoughts. It was some time later, after Kin's far longer shower, that the door opened once more, to reveal a still bare-chested Naruto, who blushed slightly, as he quickly walked over to his closet, and pulled out a shirt. Forgot the Ino, so I noticed. Temari started dully, as she sighed slightly, and gave him another look. How much longer am I going to be stuck like this? Huh? Oh, well, I'm not really sure, Naruto admitted with a pause, and a shrug of his shoulders, before he turned, and yelled out the door. Pervert, time to bring out sunshine? Won't hurt. I heard coming back. Make sure you strip her down though first. Naruto paused for a moment, staring back at the door before groaning audibly. Kin-chan, sunshine needs to be stripped, and? The voice could be heard answering back. You saying you don't want to see her naked? He opened his mouth to respond, before shutting it again with an audible click. Damn it, that's not fair. There's no right answer to that. Yes, there is. Anko's voice chimed in with a happy, audible smirk in her voice. Untie her, have her strip, and bring her in, and get a good feel of the situation, Jiraiya's voice added cheerfully. Unless, of course, you'd rather I did it? Naruto quickly slammed the door shut, immediately cutting off anything the pervert might have added before groaning audibly, as he gave the girl an almost apologetic look. So, as you can see, I don't really have much of a choice in the matter of this. Are you gonna behave? Not like I exactly have a choice in the matter. Temari glared sullenly back at Naruto before muttering audibly. If I didn't, you'd probably just spank me. Well, probably. Naruto agreed after a moment's thought, as he nodded his head thoughtfully, before blushing slightly. Well, that is, I'm going to behave, Temari stated flatly. I have no interest in being spanked. Oh, thank Kami for small favors, Naruto murmured for a moment before shaking his head, and moving over, as he lightly flicked his fingers over the ropes holding her limbs in place, and they fell apart. Well, shall we then? Still glaring, Temari sighed, and slumped just a bit, as she began to disrobe. Temari held her arm reflexively across her breasts, and between her legs, as she glared back at an amused-looking Kin and Jiraiya, as she held her head proud and high. A pointless defiance in light of what she faced, but she still had her pride. And for all its damning qualities here, and now it gave her a strength she desperately needed. Isn't that cute? She's shy, Kin noted with an utterly amused look on her face. If you think I'm going to parade about in front of you perverts, you've got another thing coming. Temari hissed back, as she leveled a glare back at the shorter girl. What, you think you've got something we haven't seen before, sunshine? Anko shot back with a chuckle. I can practically guarantee you we've all seen better. Tsunadeheim. Jiraiya started with a lecherous grin written across his face. It was so totally worth her almost killing me for. I know I have. Kin agreed with a smirk before jerking her thumb at Anko. And all she needed to do was look in the mirror. I do have a kick-ass body, don't I? Anko preened slightly, as she crossed her arms purposely under her chest. As one, the group turned their heads towards Naruto, who stared blankly back at them. What? Come on, brat. No need to be shy. The smirk plastered across Jiraiya's face was one of pure lechery. Have you or have you not seen better than sunshine here? No comment. Naruto answered back, as he blushed and looked away. Oh, come on. Anko spoke up, a feral grin on her face. How about that move you used to beat the old man? He managed to beat Sensei? Jiraiya spoke up incredulously. One hit KO from what I hear. Anko agreed, the smirk only growing on her face. Oh, now this I have to see. Kin's voice chimed in, as her eyes shone. But, Naruto immediately protested, as his hands rose up defensively. I want to see this myself. Jiraiya added in, as he stared back at Naruto with a growing smirk on his lips. Come on, sunshine, help me out here. Naruto almost whined, as he looked pleadingly at Temari for help. The girl merely stared flatly back at him. Why the hell are you asking me? Because they're all ganging up on me. He shot back, as his eyes glistened imploringly back at her. I can't believe Gaara lost to you. Temari's voice was absolutely incredulous, as she slowly shook her head again. I can't believe I lost to you. There was something about her tone, the simple disbelief, the scorn, and the derision in it that struck a chord in Naruto. A chord that quickly snapped, as he glared back at the girl with narrowed eyes. Fine, you want to be that way? Naruto growled out before his hands flashed through signs. I have seen better. And in a sudden explosion of chakra smoke, Naruto was replaced by a shapely, naked teenage girl, her long blonde hair done up in a pair of ponytails, as she stretched back with her arms behind her head, before speaking in a cute, throaty purr, as she smiled innocently at Kin. Don't you agree, Kin-chan? Kin stared back at him, mouth completely agape. Now that's what I call a technique. Jiraiya's hands rose up, thumbs pointed upwards with a lecherous grin on his face. Ha! Anko laughed out loud, as she grinned back at Naruto. I can see why the old man had a problem with that. Temari herself eyed the figure critically for a moment before snorting softly. Well, of course I'm not going to hold a candle to some perverted boy's wet dream. Hey, I am not a pervert. She pouted back at Temari before turning towards Kin. Kin-chan, she's calling me a pervert. Kin stared back at the feminine figure for a moment before slowly shaking her head. You're entirely too good at that, Naruto-sama. I practiced. She giggled again, before shaking her head, and suddenly dispersing the transformation, returning to his normal form. Stay like that when I'm training you, and I'll teach you any technique you want. Jiraiya spoke up, his eyes gleaming lecherously, as his fingers waggled meaningfully. You seriously worry me, you know that, you old pervert? Naruto inched away from Jiraiya, staring nervously back at the man with steadily widening eyes. Says the kid that uses a technique like that. Temari bit back out, as she continued to glare at the boy, as she held her arms protectively about her body. A technique I wasn't gonna use until you everyone kept pestering me about it. Naruto countered with a huffing glare, as he crossed his arms about his chest. And yet you still developed it. Temari shot back with a glare. And yet, it still knocked out a Kage. Naruto again responded, with a bit of a triumphant smirk on his lips. He's got you there, sunshine. Anko agreed with a smug little smirk on her lips. What works, works. Yup. Jiraiya agreed before he suddenly got an entirely too happy smile on his lips, as he looked off into the distance. I remember one time I took down a group of Suna Kunoichi with nothing but toad oil, and some creative undressing. I seriously don't want to know. Temari hissed out, as her glare shifted from Naruto to Jiraiya. I do. Kin spoke up quickly with a happily sadistic grin on her face, as she eyed Temari. Especially with how much you don't want him to tell you. I hate you all. Temari declared with a flat hiss of breath, as she glared at them. Yeah, Jiraiya rolled his eyes a bit, and smirked at the girl before gesturing to the clean and blank floor. Go lie down, I need to bleed the brat. Again? Naruto half-whined, as he glared lightly back at Jiraiya. Didn't you get enough last time? New batch of ink, Jiraiya stated simply with a bemused grin on his lips. Do you really want me to keep around a batch of ink that I can use to make seals attuned to you? There was a pause, the man's eyes taking on an entirely worrisome gleam, as he just smiled back at Naruto. Naruto stared back at the man for a moment, his mouth opening, then shutting before opening again, as a slight whimper escaped his lips, as he turned to Anko. I really don't want to know, do I? No, you really don't. Anko agreed with a smirk, before pausing, as she turned her head, and glanced at the still almost leering Jiraiya. And to be honest, either did I. Sports, Jiraiya muttered lightly with a slight pout. It had taken longer for Jiraiya to set up Temari's seal than it had Kin's, or more precisely, they'd discovered something about the girl that made it rather difficult for them to paint the ink onto her flesh. She was ticklish, humorously so if you took the way Anko exploded into laughter the third time Temari's foot had unconsciously struck Jiraiya's body. The fact that Kin and Naruto had joined her, albeit much more subdued, had made the grumble all the more. But still, finally the scene had reached a familiar point. The empty spot on Temari's back beckoned. So same as last time, huh? Naruto asked slightly nervously, as he rolled up his sleeve, and gingerly walked over to Temari, taking care to not step on the glistening ink of the seal array spiraling around her. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head, and a slight smirk, as he rubbed his hands in anticipation, or perhaps impatience. Put your hand down there already, brat, so I can finish it up, and we can get this show on the road. Right. Naruto shook his head, as he carefully spread his fingers against the soft, warm skin of Temari's back. You told her what will happen if things go wrong, right? Wait, go wrong? Temari immediately spoke up, her eyes widening, as she visibly tensed up. Oh, like if you chose to move at the wrong time, breaking the seal, etc., and so on. Jiraiya waved his hand negligently, as he pointed towards Kin. She's fine if you hadn't noticed. I didn't move, Kin offered helpfully, before smiling sweetly at Temari. But in the interests of a greater understanding of sealing, could you? That way I know how bad it can get. You know, if it goes wrong, there's just as much of a chance of the brat getting the backlash as her, right? Anko noted with a bemused smirk on her lips. On second thought, move a muscle, and I'll be sticking in very uncomfortable places. Kin quickly corrected, as she glared back at Temari. Make up your mind already. Temari grunted softly, her body already tensed up from the feeling of Naruto's callous hand touching on the soft flesh of her back. Why me? Naruto grunted softly, as he turned his head, and stared at Jiraiya. Did the old man secretly hate me or something? Bah! Don't you know there are men the world over that would give anything to be in your position? Jiraiya muttered audibly, as he carefully moved the ink into the final portions of the seal. Yeah, they're called perverted idiots. Naruto agreed with a mutter, and a half glare, as he twitched slightly in annoyance. Jiraiya half glared at the boy for a moment, a look of dissatisfaction on his face before sighing, as he dipped his brush into the ink once more before adding again to the designs. Go on, and ruin a poor old man living vicariously through his cute little disciple. Since when did I become your disciple? Naruto countered back with a half glare before turning his head towards a smirking Anko and Kin. Well, I sure as hell don't remember ever agreeing to it. He does have a point. You never did ask him if he even wanted to be your disciple, you old pervert. Anko agreed with a chuckle, as she leaned back idly, balancing a kunai on the tip of her finger. Details. Jiraiya waved his hand dismissively, as he continued to work on the design. Work with me here, brat. I do already have a teacher, remember? Naruto countered before wincing slightly, as he glanced away reflexively. Well, kinda. Well, he must have been some teacher to have taught you enough to beat Gaara. Temari couldn't help, but muttered slightly, before she fought down the blush, as she reluctantly added in. And me. Anko's snickering laugh made the girl turn her head, and earned her a glare, as the special spoke up, as she nudged Kin with her elbow. Right, Kakashi, he's some kinda teacher alright, ain't he, bitch? The bad kind. Kin agreed with a huff. Hell, you know who trained me more than that guy who apparently trained Naruto-sama. Well, he trained me more too, but I was his apprentice at the time. Anko agreed with a bemused smirk on her lips, as she lightly ruffled Kin's hair with her free hand. Yes, and I was his disposable little minion. Kin agreed, before pulling out and jabbing it towards Anko's hand, even as the woman twisted her hand away in a negligent, almost bored display. Which really should tell you about how much that bastard gave Remember, he is still, technically, the brat's superior. Anko cut in with a chuckle, as she flicked the back of Kin's knuckles. Thus, that means he's your superior too. Give me the old pervert any day, Kin muttered softly, as she crossed her arms about her chest, and half glared off to the side. You know, I'd feel honored, if she hadn't had more than a few moments worth of time with Kakashi. Jiraiya muttered a bit, and shook his head. He's just. The looks the two females sent him made him flinch slightly, and Naruto glanced in confusion. Huh? He's just what? Long story, kid, long story? Jiraiya muttered softly, as he focused again on the seal, double-checking it with a critical eye. Alright, whenever you're ready, just like before. So what, he beat me on what? Luck, and natural ability. Temari spoke up sarcastically before snorting a bit, cutting off Naruto's attempt to start. Yeah, right, he had training. You're right, I did. Naruto agreed, before he suddenly pushed out his chakra, and cut off anything Temari might have added. It was like suddenly being surrounded by an ocean. She could feel it churning wild, untamed, and yet moving with a flowing purpose, washing into a deep, deep part of her she hadn't ever really cared to come to understand. Unlike Kin, Temari was no expert. She had not spent countless hours crafting her control, learning intimately the way her chakra flowed, and the best way to control it. No, she had been a ninjutsu expert, and where Kin's coils had been like a carefully crafted series of pipes, to move her chakra most efficiently, hers was a spring-fed stream that could one day grow into a river, as it flowed with a steady purpose. A stream that suddenly found itself dwarfed before the ocean that was the boy above her. She couldn't begin to fathom it, to comprehend it. The sheer power she could feel him pouring back into her. The way she could feel it, moving, pouring, pulsing inside of her. The way she couldn't stop it. There was a moment of panic, as she tried, instinctively, to struggle. The already glowing, almost living lines of the seal flowing with her, following her movements even, as they began to spiral around the pair. Huh, that didn't happen last time. Anko noted aloud before she glanced to the side, and blinked a moment, as she caught sight of the blank-eyed Kin next to her, the girl's seal glowing brightly on her back. Jiraiya? He turned his head from his rapt attention at the scene in front of him, to glance back when Anko had spoken up. When he caught the telltale sight of the glow pouring out from behind the girl's back, he turned his head back to Naruto and Temari before staring at Kin again. After a moment, he opened his mouth, then shut it again in disbelief. Well damn, shouldn't we be worried? Anko spoke up, as she nervously began to edge away from Kin. Possibly. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head even, as he kept glancing from the weakly shifting Temari to the apparently vacant-eyed Kin. But there's nothing we can do about it. If we tried to break it now, right? Anko paused for a moment, before twisting a bit, as she glanced at Kin. You there, bitch? When she received no response, Anko had tentatively raised a finger up to poke at her, before Jiraiya's voice stopped her in her tracks. Don't. We don't know what kind of effect that would have. Right. Anko agreed again, as her hand dropped down before she turned her head, and stared back at Jiraiya. This is beyond freaky, you know that? Yup. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head, before pulling out his notes, and beginning to write furiously. But damn, if it isn't interesting. Temari wanted to scream. She could feel the blind, writhing panic clawing its way through her veins, as she could the way that the ocean that was the boy above her was almost violating her. Even that didn't seem to be the right word. There was no pain, no intrusion, yet she could feel him. Deep down inside, where she was supposed to be safe, where she was supposed to be untouchable. She could feel the way every barrier, every obstacle just seemed to melt away at his touch. The way that she couldn't escape, she couldn't hide. He was everywhere all at once, and it felt so damningly good. Ninja were supposed to keep secrets, they were supposed to be apart, they were supposed to have their walls, their barriers. There was supposed to be that distance, that security. There was no one you could truly trust, no one you could truly count on, not even family. Her father, and Gaara had taught her that. Yet she could feel the way her own body was turning against her, against everything it had been taught. She could feel it changing, the way everything seemed to just become more bit by bit. Then, in a flood, he was flowing into her, and she could feel everything just going white. Well, that was interesting. Anko paused for a moment, blinking just a bit, as she slowly crouched down over Temari, lightly poking the limp, unconscious girl with a tentative finger. I mean seriously. I know. Jiraiya agreed, as he continued to scribble away in his notebook. And she, I know. Jiraiya agreed with another nod of his head, as he scribbled even faster. And, I know. He proclaimed with no small amount of exasperation, as he finally finished scribbling. Well, I don't. Kin's voice intruded with a half-dazed murmur. Can someone tell me why I can't remember however long that was, and I feel like yeah. Back with us then? Jiraiya smirked softly, as he put his notes away. That was most enlightening. Enlightening? Anko started, incredulously back at Jiraiya. How the hell would you call that enlightening? Because I mean I have even more research to do to figure out how much of a genius I am. Jiraiya answered back with a proud grin on his face. That's nice and all. An extremely weary voice spoke up, as Naruto half glared at the others. But could you check on Sunshine now? A sudden rapping knock brought their attention to the door, before Naruto tiredly waved them off, and headed to answer it. I'll get it just to make sure she's okay. Half dragging his feet, Naruto leaned heavily against the door frame, as he twisted the knob, and slowly pulled the door back far enough to stick his head through. Yo, it's you. Is it you? Ino repeated back, as she gave the boy a slow building glare. That's all you have to say? Ino, in case you haven't noticed, I'm tired. Yesterday was a long, long day. The old man was dead, and Naruto leaned heavily against the doorframe, struggling to keep himself standing. And I feel like I'm about an inch away from chakra exhaustion. So, what do you want? Answers, Ino stated flatly, before firmly pushing the door open, sending Naruto tumbling back to land on his ass. Oh damn it, Ino! Quit being a bitch. Naruto growled, as he glared up at the girl, who strode purposely into his apartment. You're not the one that was up all damn night comforting your teammate, because she lost her parents in that damned invasion. Ino was glaring, angrily down at him, as her fingers clenched tightly into fists at her sides. You know the one you apparently knew all about? Wait, what? Sakura-chan? Naruto's face flashed with uncomprehending confusion, as he stared up at her with absolutely exhausted eyes. She? Apparently Sound was given instructions to just kill whoever they could. Ino's eyes turned, shifting around until she found the one she was looking for, as she pinned Kin with a cold, almost murderous glare. And some of them came across Sakura's parents. Hey! I didn't do it! Kin's hands raised reflexively in a defensive, warding gesture before she gestured towards where Jiraiya was carefully examining Temari. I was stuck watching Sunshine over there. What? The fuck? Ino stated, as she stared at Temari, before turning to Naruto, her finger pointed to Sun and In. Answers. Now, does Inoichi know you curse like that? Anko asked curiously, as she smirked just a bit, and slowly shook her head, as she leaned back, her eyes dancing in amusement. Don't you dare get started with me, Ino growled softly, as she glared back at the woman, whose eyes immediately hardened into cold slits. I would suggest, Genin, that you remember your place, and your rank, Anko countered, as a cold hiss of breath left her lips, especially when you don't have the pay grade or clearance to have been granted information about what was going on. And headed? Ino brought her finger pointedly to where Naruto continued to lie there on the ground. He's still right here. Naruto grunted out softly, as he half closed his eyes, before he would slowly sit up, and force himself back to his feet. And yes, headed. Anko agreed with a nod of her head, as she glared back at the girl. So drop the self-righteous attitude, you little idiot. You've already proven you definitely have no place earning a promotion in rank anytime soon. As Ino opened her mouth to snap back, Naruto reached out, and put his hand on Ino's shoulder, and squeezed it, almost painfully. Ino, I've already spanked Kin until she was crying today. Do you really want to lay money that I'm in the mood to put up with this? Put up with this? Ino's voice rose even louder, as her eyes burned back at Naruto, before violently pulling herself away from him. Put up with this? You smug son of a bitch! Don't you dare touch me! Well, as I never met her, I can't say if she was. Naruto shot back with half bleary eyes, as he glared back at Ino, but made no move to grab hold of her again. And if all you came here to do was yell at me, get out of here. Kin glanced over at Anko, then back at Ino, and Naruto, before lightly tapping her lips, as she spoke in a quiet voice the pair of blondes wouldn't be able to hear. You know, I'm not sure if I want to interrupt them or not. Selfish little bitch, Anko answered back just as quietly, as she watched the growing spectacle with a neutrally guarded expression on her face. Well, there would be less competition, Kin admitted quietly, as she lightly shrugged her shoulders a bit. She's the only other girl I know of who is interested in him. Anko made a quiet, non-committal sound, as she forcibly kept her eyes on the events unfolding between the boy and girl in front of them. And I told you I want some honest to Kama's answers. Ino shot back with a hiss, as her eyes seemed to burn back at Naruto. You remember, like you promised I'd get when the exams were over? I never promised you anything. Naruto shot back, as he could feel his own voice rising back at her. What I did was say I couldn't tell you anything until after the exams, not that you could force your way into my apartment, shove me to the ground, and start screaming at me. Don't you get it? Sakura's parents are dead. You remember her, right? Sakura-chan, your teammate? Ino snarled back at the boy, tears starting to glisten in her eyes, as she could feel her fingers clenching back into her palms. Dead because of that damned invasion that you knew about, and didn't tell us. I couldn't tell you about it. I couldn't tell anyone about it. Naruto snapped back, as his eyes burned down into the girl. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. You think Sakura's the only one that lost someone? You think she's the only one hurting right now? You don't understand. Ino insisted, even as she could feel the cold pit of fear starting to sink down into her stomach. She's. What am I supposed to do then, Ino? What? Naruto growled softly, as he stepped forward. How am I supposed to make it better? How? Do you think I don't wish I could bring them back? That I don't want to change things? If Ino could have met his eyes then, she never would have seen the first drop of blood dripping down from where Naruto's fingers were digging back into his palms. The words suddenly stuck in her throat, as she couldn't bring herself to tear her eyes away, watching, as that first drop became 2, then 3, watching in absolute, horrified fascination at the splattered pattern they made on the smooth, weathered floor. She knew, even before she'd arrived, before she'd let her tongue loose on him, that it hadn't been his fault, that he'd just been an easy, and willing to forgive target. She hadn't thought about how much he himself might just be hurting. She hadn't thought about how much what she'd say would hurt him on top of it. Now, as those splattered drops of blood hit the ground, she could feel the anger she'd been running on falter and run dry. It was then that the tears broke, spilling down her cheeks, as she made one last, desperate lung forward, fighting back against the way her body was falling, faltering, as she dug her fingers into his shirt, and her face buried against his chest. She could feel the way he stiffened, the way he stood there, frozen like a stone against the wet, almost mewling cries that bubbled up from her throat. For a moment, as he stood still frozen, she felt a great, and terrible, formless, wordless fear rising up inside of her, as she could feel her desperate strength waning. Then, just as she was about to slip, just as she was about to falter, she could feel his arms slipping down, catching her, as he awkwardly cradled her back against his chest. With that simple act, she let go, her fingers loosening, her body going limp, as she could feel him almost lose her at the sudden release. But in the end he caught her. In the end, he didn't let her go. Even, as she cried, and let herself be the very thing she always despised in his arms. For a brief time, she allowed herself to be weak, and to let him catch the burning touch of her tears against his own warm skin. Well, fuck, Kin muttered softly, as she glowered quietly, her arms crossing about her chest, as she stared back at where Naruto seemed lost and strong all at once, as he almost cradled Ino in his arms. Now she's gonna be almost impossible to get rid of. You know you can't really be what he needs, right? Anko stated the observation with a quiet certainty, as she draped an arm almost casually over Kin's shoulder. I can too. There was a stubbornness to Kin's voice, as she crossed her arms tightly about her chest, and suddenly looked away even, as she fought lightly against the woman's arm. No, you can't, Anko answered back, as she reached down, meaningfully tapped against the seal on Kin's back. Not, as you'll always be. That's not fair. Kin curled slightly forward, but made no move to dislodge Anko's arm, as she stared longingly at Naruto. That's life, kid. It's not fair to any of us, Anko stated simply, and lightly shrugged her shoulders, as she nodded her head towards the bedroom Jiraiya had taken Temari into. If it was, do you think any of us would have been in this kind of situation? Kin continued to stare at the display in front of her, where her master quietly comforted the blonde girl who'd, to be perfectly blunt, violated her at an incredibly intimate level. Even if she had rather vindicated herself in the months since then, there was still a small seed of resentment in her heart. Even if she had found she actually enjoyed the little bimbo's company, for the most part. Probably not, Kin murmured quietly, as she shifted uncomfortably out from under Anko's arm. Or quit that, Anko smirked, as she lightly wrapped the back of Kin's head with the ring of her kunai. I'm enjoying my big sisterly moment here. You, someone's big sister? Kin stared up at the woman, before giving a visible shudder, as she put on an expression of absolute horror. Why, oh why, do you hate me so much, as to inflict the on me? Oh hush, you little bitch. Anko countered back with a quiet mutter, while lightly ruffling the girl's hair before blinking a bit. Wait, didn't you used to keep spikes in your hair? If I still did that, then how could Naruto-sama stroke my hair? Kin looked back at the woman, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Damn, you really are a pet at heart, aren't you? Anko chuckled softly, ruffling the girl's hair once more before shaking her head just a bit. If you two are, finished? Naruto's voice cut in, as he wearily glared back at the pair, even, as he half carried the now much quieter Ino in his arms, over to the table, and gently settled her into place. I don't know, does big sister Anko need to tell the little bitch about how it's perfectly natural to be bleeding down there once a month? Anko asked with an overly sweet smile down at Kin. Does the bitch need to remind Anko that it's perfectly natural to be bleeding when said bitch stabs her with? Kin gritted out, as she glared back at the woman. Oh, isn't she cute? She thinks she can threaten me. Anko laughed softly, and smirked back at the girl. Naruto-sama, can I please borrow some of the red stuff? Kin asked with a hardened glint in her eyes, as she glared back at Anko. No, Naruto stated flatly, as he dropped down into his chair. I like my apartment in one piece. He paused there before slowly shaking his head. You can get me some cards though. Cards? Ino finally spoke up again, her eyes still red-rimmed, as she carefully turned her eyes from Kin to Naruto to Anko then back to Naruto again. This is gonna take too damn long. Naruto paused for a moment before sighing slightly. I take it the old pervert put sunshine in my room? On your bed even. Jiraiya spoke up with a smirk, as he somehow reappeared right behind Naruto. You've got a girl sleeping in your bed? Ino stated, before her eyes widened slightly, as her mind finally caught up with what she'd seen. That's the sand girl. The one you another connection made. Ino swirled around, suddenly pointing her finger with wordless accusation at Kin. You know, princess, there are better things you could be using that finger for than pointing it at me. Kin noted with a slightly smug little smirk on her lips, and an exaggerated wiggle of her eyebrows. Or she could, open up her whole hand, and give you a spanking. Naruto suggested tiredly, as he glanced from Ino to Kin then back again. She'd probably enjoy it. Which is she? Jiraiya couldn't help but ask, as his eyes glittered lecherously. As both Kin and Ino blushed brightly, Naruto shrugged his shoulders slightly. Both of them? Careful there, brat, it sounds like the girls are starting to make progress with you. Anko smirked back at the boy, as she slid down into a seat herself. So, what are we playing? We? Naruto echoed lightly, as he arched a brow back at Anko while leaning back in his chair. You want me to be bored? Couldn't you go bug Anbu-chan? Naruto offered hope. Nope, afraid not. Anko disagreed with a shake of her head. And why not? She's at the hospital, visiting her boy toy. Oh, damn it. Who's gonna protect me from all you perverts then? Naruto muttered softly, as he glanced around before sighing slightly, as his head hit the table. Great. If it's any consolation, you're resisting much better than my last student did. Jiraiya offered with an oddly nostalgic smile on his face. Of course, by then he'd already fallen for the love of his life, he just didn't know it yet. I don't want to know about how you turn people into weight. Wasn't your last student? Naruto paused for a moment, before staring in horror at Jiraiya. You, yes? Jiraiya answered back with a growing smugness on his face. You turned the fourth into a pervert? Jiraiya stared at the boy for a moment before hanging his head, and sighing slightly. So close, and yet, there. Anko patted Jiraiya's shoulder consolingly. You know he's mainly doing that just to spite you, the bimbo, and the bitch, right? He is? Jiraiya asked, his eyes starting to show hope once more. No, I'm not. Naruto argued back, as he glared back at Anko. Of course he is. Anko continued on, ignoring Naruto's interjection, as she smirked softly. Surely you've noted he's just stubborn enough to fight it off longer than most. Well, Jiraiya nodded his head in a slight admission before pondering just a bit. I suppose there is that. He nodded his head lightly before chuckling a bit. Oh, by the way, I've got a mission in a couple of days, and you're coming with me. I am? My, how forward. Anko batted her lashes back at Jiraiya before smirking a bit. But unfortunately you can't afford me. Not you, me, and the brat. He paused a moment before waving his hand negligently. And the bitch, and Sunshine too of course. You know, someone should really fill Ino in on this first. Naruto cut in, as he shifted slightly away from where Ino's temper was rapidly returning. Well, she's cleared to know now, right? Kin spoke up, as she glanced inquiringly at Anko and Jiraiya, who nodded back at her before she turned and faced Ino. It's pretty simple, Sunshine, and I are Naruto-sama's property. Property? Ino stared at Kin, incomprehension written on her face, as she seemed to struggle to fully understand that simple word. We're his spoils. Ino started, wide-eyed, as she turned and started over at Naruto. You took them as spoils. What kind of? I took Kin as a spoil so I wouldn't have to execute her. Naruto shot back, as he immediately tensed up again, even as he threw a glare at the girl in question. Temari was the old man's idea. Part of the reparations Sand is gonna have to give up for pulling the stupid shit. Kin added helpfully with a cheerful nod of her head. The cards, Kin-chan. Naruto chided lightly even, as he fought down the urge to pinch at the bridge of his nose. But there was a note of protest in the girl's voice, as she almost whined out her objection. Now, Naruto answered back firmly, as he simply gave her a look. Yes, Naruto-sama. The dark-haired girl bowed, somewhat stiffly to the boy, then turned her back to him so he wouldn't see the small smile flashing across her lips, as she walked back to the room. Naruto grunted softly before blinking slightly at the look Ino was giving him. What? 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 You pull all that, and you just ask me what? Ino repeated, as she stared at him with no small amount of incredulity written on her features. Yes? Naruto offered in a somewhat helpful voice, as he stared back at her in confusion. Something wrong? You! Ino screamed out quietly before burying her hands in her face. Yeah, the brat tends to have that effect on people. Anko agreed, as she wandered over and lightly patted Ino on the back. Don't let it bother you too much. I have no idea what you're talking about. Naruto answered back without even the slightest hesitation in his voice while he stared pointedly out the window. Here are the cards, Naruto-sama. Kin offered neutrally, as she set the pack down and settled back into a seat next to him. That was quick, Naruto noted with a blink, as he eyed Kin carefully. The bedroom is how many feet away? Kin asked back with a sarcastic deadpan. Fine, Naruto admitted grudgingly, as his face took on a slight glower back at her before settling in, as he looked at Ino while picking the cards up and beginning to shuffle them in his hands. So, what do you want to know? Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.